Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 18, Interlude the First. And welcome back to The Crisis Tapes. I'm one of your hosts, Peter.
And I'm the other one, Adam.
Hey, Adam, how are you?
Doing great, Peter. Thanks for joining us here in the CGS studio.
That's right.
Which has been lying fallow here for about 2.5 months since we developed a few technical difficulties. But the kind of show we produce here, those problems do not need to give us pause.
That's right.
So we're just staring at my staff crisisologist placard with pride.
That's right. We got our schedules to line up to come back and talk about The Crisis. Just to pull the curtain back, I mean, you could be listening to these episodes back to back, but the last time we were together was December 2017.
Mm-hmm. So that's a difference of about 18 months between episodes of this show, which is, it's usually produced roughly annually. But,
Right.
Even that's a little less often than we'd like. So a little behind schedule here, but better late than never.
Right.
And so we're coming to you here in between important issues of the Crisis series. Last episode, number 17, we talked about Part 2 of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Maxi Series, Issue 4. And as we know, Marvel, this is something we observed on our own, and then deeper research into Wolfman's intention revealed this to us. Marv Wolfman actually intended the 12-issue Crisis series to break down roughly into 4-issue acts or phases.
Correct.
So here we are. It was just a very convenient break point after issue 4, that major climax where all the surviving universes appear to vanish into antimatter and then into darkness. And it was just a major holy shit moment as all of DC fandom held its breath in 1985. And it was a perfect time for us to take a break from the usual sequence of analysis and discussion and talk about some other stuff.
That's right. Perfect little pit stop. Technically, we don't even exist. All the universes have blinked out. We shouldn't even be here.
We are hosts in limbo.
That's right. Because we don't know what our schedule will be like. We never like to talk about when we're going to return or whatever. I thought, let's do this right now. We have an anniversary coming up in December of this year, because December 6th, 2009 was the very first Crisis Tapes episode.
Uncanny.
So we are going on 10 years by the end of 2019.
That was a pretty innovative year. I just realized I released a time bubble a couple of months ago, and I realized it was just about exactly, by coincidence, it was going to be released just about exactly on the 10th anniversary of the first time bubble in 2009.
We were hot back in 2000.
Oh, yeah, we were a spin-off machine.
We tasted the bug, and we couldn't stop. Oh, that's funny. So this is an interlude episode. And what we are going to do with these episodes, our original plan was take a look at the DC Universe, at all the other titles outside of the Crisis that shipped during the months of Crisis issues number 1 through 4, and see if they had anything that had to do with the Crisis, whether it was an official tie-in, whether it was a mention. Did we get to these issues because of a footnote in Crisis? And that's what the focus of this kind of interlude episode will be. However, in this first one, between Crisis on Infinite Earths number 1 through 4, there are only a handful of issues that we can really talk about. So we're going to make this kind of like a catch-all episode where we're going to talk about a whole bunch of Crisis-related topics.
Yep, some from the period and some more contemporary.
Correct. So you're going to get a nice chunky episode, and it gives us a way to bridge the gap between the first act and the second act of the Crisis. And and it also gives us a chance to wet our whistle again in the Crisis universe and just kind of gab for a little bit, right?
Right.
So we have a bunch of different segments we're going to do in this episode, and we're going to start it off with how you can spend money on the Crisis, because there have been a number of collections in the past, maybe a year or two. This may not be complete. A lot of this information may not be complete, but these are things that we caught, we researched, and by all means, if we miss anything, let us know. But we're going to start off with a couple of collections, and we'll start with one of Adam's favorite events. So why don't you kick us off here?
I'll kick us off, but you'll have to run it in for the touchdown. Yeah, because all original research in this episode is courtesy of the University of Rios Press. I gotta say, he did a lot more work to put this episode together than I did, and he was just kept on sending me emails saying, "Hey Adam, check out this thing I found," and "Hey Adam, here's this other thing," and here's the scans of the pages that I painstakingly made and emailed to you. So, thank you, Peter. This is your work much more than mine. But you're absolutely right that 0 Hour Crisis in Time is a favorite of mine. I mean, it pales in comparison to the original Crisis, the text that's really the focus of this podcast most of the time. But it's the series that got me into DC fandom back in 1994. I took it as the ideal jumping on point. I just started reading Marvel stuff like 2 years earlier. And it did what it set out to do in that it re-streamlined post-crisis DC continuity and chronology a little bit, and provided a convenient jumping-on point for neophytes like myself. So it definitely did its work with me. So that was a 5-issue miniseries, plus a whole bunch of crossovers, plus a whole month's worth of zero issues for every existing DC Comics series, and also a handful of brand new ones that were being launched out of 0 Hour. And now there's a hardcover. It was just released last month here, apparently.
2018.
Oh, last month, a year ago, right? I'm forgetting which year it is. So 13 months ago, a hardcover with a new intro by the architect of this grand disaster, Dan Jurgens. And Peter's notes here says that it includes an updated timeline, because there was this cool kind of gatefold thing in, I think it was probably 0 Hour number 0, which was the final issue of that series. It counted down from 4 to 0. Giving an updated sequence of events, which is fairly similar to what was laid out in History of the DC Universe, but with a number of significant changes. And does this mean that the timeline included in the hardcover is even updated from what was in there in 1994?
Correct. Apparently, they one of the selling points on the solicitation was that there's new updated material. And from what I was able to find from a YouTube unboxing video, is that most of the new material looks like it's coming in where it says 5 years ago and today. So, for instance, if I clipped an image from that YouTube video, and you can see they added in Wonder Woman and Impulse, who are not on the original timeline back in '94. So I have to imagine everything from 5 years ago onward is just slightly revamped. There might be some other changes earlier in the timeline, but I can't see it. I haven't found an image online. I don't own the hardcover. So just by going from that image alone and you compare it to the original, Wonder Woman and Impulse are new, and I'm sure there's probably more to it. So it says updated, but really I think it's only updated up to... They just threw in new stuff up to 94, 95, nothing all the way up to 2019.
It just only makes sense, really.
Yeah.
Just beefing up stuff that they probably should have had in there to begin with.
Right.
Yeah, and I can't help but get a laugh out of those 4 headshots all the way in the lower right, which is supposed to represent the future.
Oh, right.
The Chase Lawler Manhunter, Jack Knight Starman, Jared Stevens Fate, and Red Tornado to represent the Primal Force team. 1 out of 4 ain't bad.
So that'll cost you $24.99 if you want that hardcover. So that's obviously something that's Crisis related. Are we good on that one? Should we go on?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So then we get to November of 2018. This was the first of 3 deluxe edition companions to the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis on Infinite Earths Companion, deluxe edition, hardcover, volume 1. And they are billing this as collecting tie-ins, a few pre-Crisis Monitor appearances, just a few. A lot of this material has not shown up in any other collection. And I hesitate to say it's complete. It's not. It may be all of the bannered tie-ins. There are also some unbannered tie-ins.
Right.
But if you're someone who you don't want to go shopping through the back issue bins, these are pretty good. There's 2 of them out so far, and a third one just recently solicited that we'll talk about. And if you're a Crisis completist and you don't want to go shop in the back issue bins, yeah, I would say now it's a little pricey. It's $75.
Yeah.
Where I think you could find these issues much cheaper, probably.
It just takes a little bit of extra personal effort.
Yeah. But what did you think about what's in the collection so far? Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well,
I have a few.
It's interesting that they started with DC Comics Presents number 78 because that's the lead off, and
Right.
that's one of those pre-Crisis Monitor appearances you mentioned.
Sure.
And if I'm not mistaken, that is the one that leads us directly into the opening pages of Crisis number 1.
Yeah, they say it at the end of the issue, right? Yeah.
So let us turn our attention to Earth 3.
Yeah. So maybe I guess that's probably why they included that. Right? Yeah. Okay.
That is, it's good sequencing on their part. And then they bundle together they're not going in strict chronological order here, just like a sampling from each series crossed over into. Rather, they're lumping together all the crossovers from a given series. In the volume in which that series appears. So instead of just a couple of All-Star Squadron crossovers and then like 1 or 2 from other series within that same time frame, and then moving forward in time that way, we get all of the All-Star Squadron crossovers, which happen to be issues 50 through 60, a full 11 issues. Yeah, that's because All-Star Squadron is one of those ongoing DC series that was most impacted by Crisis, after all. And then, as you note here in your notes, Peter, the last 4 of those, 57, 58, 59, 60, they're not bannered as Crisis crossovers, but they are very much impacted by the fallout from Crisis. Because 60 is kind of where we lead up to where the effect of Crisis and the merging of Earths and timelines finally... it was held at bay by a character called Mechanique, who is improved, kind of based on the female android from Fritz Lang's film Metropolis. And Roy Thomas had fun with her and stuck her in there. And then we're told that she used some power of hers to hold back the reality rewriting wave of Crisis entropy or whatever that was retroactively wiping out all the parallel Earths. Held that off just in time for Roy Thomas to finish what he had to say in issue 60. And then finally, whoop, there's never been an Earth 2. There's never been Earth 2 Batman or 2 Superman, etc. And then we kind of proceed into the future of the past, where Roy Thomas explores to a limited degree in the Young All-Stars series what the golden age of DC heroes was like without an Earth 2 on which to be set. So that's a big chunk of Roy Thomas 40s by way of the 80s retro goodness, even including a 2-page essay to introduce those reprints by Roy Thomas himself. Which doubtless we can say a couple things about here in a minute. Also including a couple issues of Fury of Firestorm and 5 Green Lantern issues. And those are preceded by status quo mini-essays by Bob Greenberger, who is an important and often undermentioned Crisis participant because Marv Wolfman was writer-editor, but he was associate editor under Wolfman, and also helped with some of the plotting and did a lot of the research.
Correct. Sort of like the go-between between the creators of Crisis and the other editors and writers throughout the DC universe.
Right. Yeah. He was kind of like a liaison.
Yeah.
And tried to get as many people on board, like a creator wrangler.
Yeah. And then also included in the issue, a new Marv Wolfman intro from 2018. As Adam mentioned, an essay by Roy Thomas on All-Star Squadron, and then those mini essays by Robert Greenberger, and then a timeline by Greenberger, which, again, I don't have this hardcover, and I couldn't find it online, any images, so I don't know what that timeline consists of.
Tantalizing possibility.
Yeah. So if anybody has that companion volume 1, you should send it along. Pictures of that last.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't send the volume.
No, not the volumes.
But if you could somehow scan it for us, we would appreciate that very much.
So 2 things we are gonna. I have a few more notes on if you do as well.
Oh yes,
Wolfman's intro, the Wolfman's intro. This was where he mentions that although Crisis has been reprinted many times, this is the first time all the crossover stories have been reprinted since their original publication back in 1985. I think he's correct if we go by the bannered ones. I think it's going to have all the bannered ones, but there are some things that are missing. Because there's some like random issues in some of the titles where, even though they came after a bannered Crisis tie-in, they still kind of are part of the Crisis tie-in concept, But I see his point. I don't think we have yet to get any collection that has ever had everything pre, post, bannered, whatever. But I think he's right more or less for this for these 3 volumes.
Yeah, his statements may not be correct to the letter, but I see his intent in making them,
Right.
and agree with it.
Yeah. Did you have anything from his intro?
Yeah, small list actually.
Okay.
Let's see. I thought it was cool that he mentions the fact that the original embryonic idea for Crisis took shape while he was making his way to Pennsylvania for a convention. So it's kind of like the Crisis was born here in our home state.
I think I think you even mentioned that before. Another interview we read somewhere along the way.
It does kind of feel like
to Philadelphia or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just cool that there's a Pennsylvania connection to all of this. So it's like he got the idea from, and this is something that he's mentioned many times. A letter writer wrote into Green Lantern, which he was editing at the time, and said, the DC continuity is too confusing, all these parallel Earths, you should simplify it. And Wolfman just kind of non-committally agreed. And then the more he thought about it, the more committal his agreement became. And then as he made that fateful train ride out of Pennsylvania, the idea took shape. And then he pitched it to his upper-ups, to his superiors at DC, and history began. Okay, he gives us his list of 3 things that he set out to impress on readers, which seem pretty much like 3 of the same point, really. It's just that what he wanted to impress on readers was that this series was going to matter. It was going to have a long-lasting, real, permanent, and far-flung impact on DC Comics. See, since this is a collection of crossovers, it's appropriate that Wolfman acknowledges all the help, and also lack thereof, that he got from other people at DC. It seems like just about everything that you floated to me to read for this episode, Peter, but between this and a couple of the fan press articles we'll be talking about later on, Wolfman is always careful to mention that he's not unilaterally going about this revamping of the DC universe. He insists that he's not acting without supervision. Everything had to be taken to Dick Giordano and Jeanette Kahn for approval, and he secured as much help and input as he could squeeze out of his fellow writers and editors, just to make sure that they didn't feel like they were being victimized by all of this. Give them a chance to participate, including Roy Thomas, as we'll see in a minute.
Which I think is a point that people forget. I think they forget that about corporate commentary. I'm going to get on a little soapbox right now, because there's been several events that have gone recently, too, where right away they either want to attack a writer or they want to say, they want to feel like these comics don't exist in a company, from a company, and readers, these are corporate comics. Events are not made out of the forehead of a writer and an artist, and that's it. You have the bean counters, you have marketing. I think one of these articles even mentions something about marketing, mentioned something, and they were like, that's a great idea, so I just think we need to remember that, as great as this was, it was a company event. It
was a massive collaboration.
Yeah. And whether we agree with some of the outcomes, that's different. That's a different story. But no writer, no artist, no creator can. If Watchmen can can be changed, if Dark Knight Returns had some kind of editorial, fingers in it, everything is going to have that. So I just wanted to say that real quick.
And that corporate overdetermination you're talking about has only gotten worse as time has gone by.
Maybe. I mean, maybe not. I don't know we don't work in that field. So, I just feel like people think that these comics, they're not created in a committee, but they are. Comics are created in a committee. And these events, I think on Twitter, somebody mentioned, so I was just on a podcast called DC OCD. And what they're doing is they're going through all the DC events, one episode per event, just giving an overview. So I was on for the time in between Identity Crisis and Infinite Crisis, the countdown with the 4 miniseries. And yeah, I mean, I love it. It's a great time for DC Comics.
I know. And that's about when Comic Geek Speak was getting off the ground.
Yeah.
And, remember what great energy there was around DC fandom at that time.
And what they do is they then give points for certain criteria, and then they rank all the events. They have like this ladder or whatever. So they posted something on Twitter about Genesis. And Paul Kupperberg, I guess, was either the writer or editor. No, he's the editor, I think, of that, or was
I want to say Byrne was the writer.
Okay,
on that.
Right. So Paul Kupperberg must have been on for like editor.
Yeah, he was kind of dabbling in the fourth world corner of the DCU at that time.
And he responded by saying something like, "Oh, the horror."
Even he says that,
right?
There were problems there.
Yeah, so I think they freely admit, or they know when these things go south, right? And clearly he felt that way. So I thought that was an interesting. When I saw that, I was like, oh, that's funny. See, they know what history is, and they know what they have to do, and some things work and some things don't, and then they go, okay, let's go to the next.
It's fun when enough time passes that they can go on record as saying that was a cluster F.
Right. So, all right, just a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, but it's funny you bring that point up at this point in time, though, Peter, because just crossing back over to what's been going on the Comic Geek Speak podcast regularly these days. We talked about Heroes in Crisis and the many problems we had with that miniseries, and we did our best to lay all the blame at the feet of corporate for that, as opposed to writer Tom King, who's, after all, a friend of ours. Right. And actually, a lot of our listeners took us to task for being too easy on Tom.
Well, I mean,
they might have a point, too, because, as you say, these are corporate comics, and they are created by committee, and the editors meddle sometimes a little more than they ought to. Yeah. But, some of the blame has to be laid at the feet of the creators in the end, too.
Right, because, I mean, if they're getting some of that feedback, what they have to do is then they have to make it work in the story, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Like, I feel like we want the best for these books, and we forget that so do the creators. You know what I mean? The creators want the best for them.
Oh, sure.
And sometimes some things just get out of the way, or get out of hand, or get out of their way. But I think when I see people online lay the blame at the feet of one person, I'll pick Dan DiDio. Like, that's still going. People to this day are still like,
very popular scapegoat.
Come on, like, grow up,
I've been guilty of that myself.
Yeah, we all have. But I mean, I feel like we have this is the danger of social media these days, because we get to see a lot of what's going on in the background, and I really wish sometimes we don't, So, all right.
I agree. And, talking about this crisis stuff is kind of a nice little flashback to the simpler time when there was, like, almost nothing in the way of fan press and transparency of the creative process. Right. It's just the stuff magically appeared as though manna from heaven on the comic shelves and spinner racks of the nation. Yeah. And we just accepted them for what they were and kind of enjoyed not knowing how the sausage is made.
Ignorant bliss. So I interrupted your points there. So I think you were on your...
let's see. So you're talking of the crossovers. Wolfman actually, in this intro to the companion volume 1, he talks about the Red Sky crossovers and how he admits that was created, specifically as a kind of opt-out cop-out, like a minimum commitment way for skeptical creators to tie their book into Crisis without really wading in all the way. Just like, there's the red skies and the weather phenomena and stuff happening in the background. Okay, back to what we're doing. Just not to derail the creators' already placed plans for their series. a way for them to be a part of Crisis, or at least acknowledge a crisis is happening without going in whole hog.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to. That's actually what this type of episode is about. Is I want to, when we get to those kind of tie-ins, because that's been another sort of historical comment about Crisis tie-ins. Oh, they're all Red Sky tie-ins, and that's it. And it's like, well, not really,
Yeah,
and
not all of them.
No,
not nearly all of them.
And some of them, if they were Red Sky tie, what I think people are confusing those tie-ins with is they're not necessarily the bannered tie-ins. They're the books leading up to the beginning of the actual Crisis. So if readers, listeners, if you remember, Crisis number 1 takes place in the DC universe in July of 1985. It was meant to be a couple months later than where their regular books were at the time in continuity, right?
So that allows the storylines currently going on in the other series to play out and catch up.
Right. So but before they caught up, there were some Red Sky moments, but they weren't bannered tie-ins. They were just acknowledging that it was coming.
Right. Just rumblings on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think that's what some people think of when they think of the tie-ins. They go, oh, it was all about the Red Skies. It's like, well, yeah, they were, but is that any different than when Thor opened the Casket of Ancient Winters and all the Marvel Universe had to deal with winter all of a sudden, So I think they get confused with what's an official tie-in, what was the lead up in the books to the tie-ins, and what is like the unofficial bannered tie-in. So that's one thing I'm really going to look at when we do all these things.
So it's not that they were all there were just degrees of an entanglement with the Crisis series.
Correct.
And really, Wolfman said that the original plan was for there to be like a sequence of signs of the apocalypse, if you will. Like first the Red Skies, then we'd see like extreme weather phenomena and showing up in various DC series, then the skips in time and space. I don't think that progression between symptoms ever really manifested in the crossovers too much.
Right.
He tried, there were interoffice memos, there were master boards set up, but it's just a hard thing to coordinate, especially when not everybody working at DC even wanted this to happen.
Right.
There were some who actively campaigned against it, which is another thing that Wolfman mentions in this intro. Quote, hell, many campaigned against it, unquote. So, and he ends up his essay by giving special thanks to Bob Greenberger, quote, for his calm and steady professionalism, and it would take nothing less than that to weather the storm that was Crisis. And he opines that, quote, to date it has not been beaten nor equaled, end quote, as a massive reality restructuring event of its kind, often imitated, never duplicated.
Yeah. I've gone on record saying Blackest Night is pretty damn good as a corporate crossover in the sense of these grand crossovers, when it comes to like merchandising tie-ins, having one artist on the entire book, which Perez can't even. Well, I mean, he can say, but his inkers were all over the place, So yeah, I noticed that too when Wolfman said that. I was like, well, that's okay, maybe. For what you say is correct, for like reality, Yeah,
what was his actual wording there?
I don't think he threw that in. I have it here. He says, I believe it not only holds up as a really solid company-wide crossover, let alone the first of its kind, but to date it has not been beaten nor equaled. Now, if he's laying it at those feet, I'm going to have to I still give it to Blackest Night, but if you throw in the whole continuity shifting thing, sure, then it's the Crisis. But that's my own personal thing.
Yeah, it's much smaller field of competition when you narrow it down that way.
Yeah,
too.
really. Yeah.
But and I'd like to agree with you about Blackest Night, but to be honest, I haven't read much of it yet. So just wait a few years.
Yeah. Also celebrating its 10th anniversary.
Real 2009.
Yes.
Wow, look at you.
Is that it for the Wolfman's intro?
For Wolfman's intro to that companion, yeah.
Okay. And then let's go to the Roy Thomas one.
Oh, by all means, yes, because that was very interesting to me.
I only have two here that, and I'll throw it to you. So he says, mostly by coincidence, the mini landmark 50th issue of All-Star Squadron would come out at the same time as Crisis number 1. That is not correct. So his memory's not helping him on that. All-Star Squadron 50 is cover dated October 85. Crisis number 1 is cover dated April 85. So I think probably what he was thinking was that it was going to happen in the middle of the Crisis.
Yeah.
There's no way he could have written All-Star Squadron 50 when Crisis 1 came out, because he wouldn't have had that information. I mean, unless he was seeing original artwork and scripts, it hadn't shipped yet. So how would he recreate Firebrand's entrance into the Crisis with Harbinger if he hadn't read it yet? You know what I mean? So that's a little maybe memory glitch there.
Yeah, even Roy the Boy is only human, and he's
Sure.
well, what is he, like 75 or something by now?
Yeah, probably. And then the only other thing I thought was kind of interesting was the first chapter of All-Star Squadron 50, which was called, the entire story was called Crisis Point. The first chapter was called Shanghaied into Hyperspace, and I just thought that was an interesting use considering DC's use of hyper time. So Roy Thomas took all these old Golden Age stories where the various members of the JSA got rocketed off into space to all of our different planets within our solar system by the Nazis. He took all that, and instead of throwing them out into our solar system, they went to alternate dimensions. So that's why there just happens to be people on all of these planets,
Right,
aliens.
So they went like to the Venus of Earth 4 or the Saturn of Earth X,
Yeah.
etc.
And he called it, Shanghaied into Hyperspace. So I thought that was interesting. It's kind of like a primordial use of that term, even though it's not the right term, but it's kind of the same concept in a way, a little bit, a little tiny bit, yeah. So that's what I pulled from his essay. What did you have?
Shanghai into Hyperspace came up in my list also. Just cool that he took. It's what Roy did so well. It's what he enjoyed so much about writing that series, which he also says in this essay. He goes on record as saying this is his favorite series, his favorite thing that he's ever done in comics, and to this day. And that makes me glad to hear him say that, because it's also my favorite thing that he's ever done in comics. It's one of my favorite series ever, and it's the very first that I ever completed a run of in back issue form. So I'm glad that he feels as fondly about it as I do. Not that I really doubted that too much. So the Shanghai, his essay is pretty much just a historical recap, which is what Roy does, again, talking about all the different things that he was doing in these 11 issues of All-Star Squadron that follow in the reprint volume. The events of issue number 50, where he finally brings all the Quality Comics Golden Age characters that he'd introduced on Earth 2 and shunts them over to Earth X, so that they're there where they need to be when, as we jump forward in time to that 70s Justice League arc where they were introduced as the Freedom Fighters. So Roy Thomas reveals that they were all originally Earth 2 natives, and then they just migrated to Earth X to help fight the Nazi war machine, and they ultimately fail. So that's something that Roy had been planning to do for some time, and he's kind of in hurry-up mode here to get it done while there's still a multiverse in which to do these things. And he talks about how there's another crossover between the Golden Age Marvel family from the old Fawcett comics on Earth S, as mentioned in the Spotlight on Shazam and the Bronze Age episodes that we just finished on CGS proper. Mm-hmm. He talks about the Earth 2 Aquaman, which is one of my favorite Golden Age retcons that Roy executed here. He mentions that he was actually asked by some editor or other not to bother introducing an Earth 2 Aquaman, since he's going to be retroactively wiped out of existence shortly anyway, but Roy just kind of scoffs and says, okay, I'm going to make extra sure I put that Earth 2 Aquaman in there now. And I say, good for you, Roy. Just gather Earth 2 roses while you may. And he talks about the whole mechanique thing that I mentioned earlier, and that damned photograph. In the late issues of All-Star Squadron, there's a group photo taken of all the different members of All-Star Squadron, the Earth 2 characters. And then at the end of issue number 60, you see the time wave goes through, and we get a second look at that photograph, and we see that it's changed to reflect the fact that the Earth 2 versions, like the duplicates of characters like Superman, Batman, etc., including Aquaman, no longer exist, and they've been replaced by a bunch of Earth X characters that never went to Earth X, since there never was an Earth X. And Roy complains that even that wasn't quite the most complete and accurate visual statement of the changes that have been made, because he would have liked to see some Golden Age non-Marvel family Fawcett characters stuck in there, like Bullet Man and so forth. But yeah, so it gets kind of wistful, this essay of his. He goes on record as saying, quote, "I'll admit I would have preferred Crisis had never been published." Again, as if we didn't know. And he concludes by saying, "Please permit me a moment of silence for my beloved All-Star Squadron." And that's your lead in.
Right. He lays it out there, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. And he also mentions along the way that he was promised that he would be allowed to continue. He was one of the most ardent and what's the word I'm looking for here? I get alacritous, possibly, just willing participants. One of the gladdest and most prolific contributors crossover-wise to this whole Crisis project. He provided tons of input, particularly as the usage of Earth 2 goes. And he was promised, guarantees were made that were eventually rendered no longer operative, quote unquote, that he would be allowed to continue doing All-Star Squadron on Earth 2. Earth 2 and its history would continue to exist in the past, but once you got up to 1985 in the timeline, suddenly Earth 2 would blink out of existence and only a few people would remember it. But I guess somewhere along the line it was decided that was too complicated, and Earth 2 was indeed retroactively done away with and would no longer exist at any point in the timeline, nor would it ever have existed at any point in the timeline, even to the point that nobody remembered that it was around. And this was constantly being renegotiated, apparently. Just plans for how they were going to handle the changes that were made and which characters in story would remember the change, like who remembered what. And in the end, I guess they just decided to be safe about it and obliterate everything and just only Psycho Pirate and maybe Harbinger remembered that there had ever been a multiverse.
Yeah.
And that's not at all what Roy had been promised. And to his credit, he's not too bitter about it here, 30 years later.
So all of that from the Crisis on Infinite Earths Companion Deluxe Edition hardcover, Volume 1.
Yep, that's just the text pieces, for crying out loud.
And by the way, that is under a cover showcasing All-Star Squadron 50 with some slight changes of the background and color, I think. But, if anybody's probably still getting royalties, it's Roy Thomas from the Crisis.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah. So then we moved to April 2019, just a few months ago, and we got the second volume, Crisis on Infinite Earths Companion Deluxe Edition Hardcover Volume 2. This one under a cover, again, another recoloring of New Teen Titans, the Baxter Series, issue 14, where, All-Star Squadron 50, great. It has Harbinger right in the middle. It's got the Earth 2 characters around. Totally makes sense. New Teen Titans 14, although it is a Crisis bannered tie-in.
And it is Perez artwork.
Yeah. It's, I think the cover's Barreto. Yeah.
Oh, my mistake. Well, you would know better than I.
It's the start of the storyline where Starfire and Nightwing and Jericho go to Tamaran, where she is going to marry some random Tamaranian, for the glory of the Empire. And they are getting on the cover, they're getting pulled onto the ship. So it's not even a Crisis-related image, whereas New Teen Titans 13 is. It's sort of all of them running towards the viewer, and then there's a lot of Crisis stuff in the background, red skies, lightning. Very similar to the events of issue number 3, where they're in New York and trying to stop the madness with the Outsiders.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual cover.
Yeah, it's a strange choice, yeah.
Yeah. Especially when you look at what's inside the cover, inside the hardcover. So this volume collects Detective Comics 558, which is not a bannered Crisis crossover. DC Comics Presents 86, Swamp Thing 44, The Losers Special, Legends of the DCU Crisis on Infinite Earths, a special that came out years later.
Yeah, 10 years later? It was, mid to late 90s.
Infinity Inc. 18 through 25 and Annual 1, Justice League of America 244, 245, and, as I mentioned, New Teen Titans 13 and 14. Yeah, so you have the image up there of
Yeah.
the
And you're absolutely right. It is Barreto with inks by Romeo Tango.
yeah. So that's well, I guess the background has the red skies, and I guess that could, but that's not, and that's not Crisis. They're getting pulled. You can see the ship up above, so
Yeah,
that's
and it's not the monitor ship either. This
No.
is, as you said, this is just Tamaranian politics happening here.
yeah.
It's-
Which tie-in would you have picked as a cover? Do you think? I think I know which one I would have picked, but
The selection here, I'd probably go with DCCP 86.
which one?
I think that's Superboy Prime.
Let's look that up. I wondered if that was maybe the Supergirl Black Star story. You wouldn't want the losers on there? Is that too random, do you think?
Yeah, by far. Yeah.
Okay.
And besides, it's one of the least authentically crisis-related tie-ins because well, they gave it to Kanigher to write.
Right.
And I didn't know who Robert Kanigher was when I first read that tie-in, but knowing it now, it makes a lot more sense why that one shot had as little to do with actual crisis events as it did.
Yeah. I understand why they didn't pick New Teen Titans 13 because that's the cover of one of the trades for New Teen Titans itself. So I guess maybe they didn't want it to be duplicated somewhere else. But I guess that's why they went with...
You got me again, Peter. You're right. It is the Superman Supergirl team up with Black Star in the background. I think Superboy Prime might have been 87.
Yeah. I would have... that one's at least... Well, I don't know. Well, that's why we're not in the job of marketing, I guess, or whatever.
Maybe one of the Infinity Inc. Issues. The last parallel world story, or parallel Earth story, which I'm pretty sure is what Roy Thomas decided to call that. It's part of the crossover between Infinity Inc. and the new Detroit Bunker Justice League.
So, I didn't really have any notes for that one because, again, I wasn't able to see if they had an intro or anything. Did you have any thoughts on?
No notes here either. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw some sample pages, and it would appear that there aren't any lengthy essays in this one, just the little status quo mini essays by Bob Greenberger.
Right. Here, I'm going to show you. What do you think of Justice League 244 as the one with Steel versus Steel, the future versus the past?
Well, yeah, that's something, but...
At least it's not another Earth 2 title. Like All-Star Squadron 50 was Earth 2. This is a little more Earth 1 centric, but...
Granted.
Yeah. Oh, well. Like I said, we're not the ones making those decisions. If I was an editorial or something, I would have been like, guys, you can't use that. Anyway. All right. Let's move to the third volume, even though it's upcoming. Crisis on Infinite Earths, the companion hardcover, Volume 3, is just solicited in the July previews, and that'll ship, I'm not sure when it'll ship, actually. And this one will cover Emesis 13, Blue Devil 17 and 18, Wonder Woman 327 through 329, Swamp Thing 46, Legion of Superheroes 16 and 18, Superman 413 through 415, Justice League Annual 3, DC Comics Presents 87, 88, 94, and 95, and Omega Men 31 through 33.
And, that's going to be released on September 25th, according to what I've just clicked on over here. And if this is the cover image... Yeah, it's the cover image to what I think is DC Comics Presents number 95, which is, though, the one that features the cover blurb that says it's a post-crisis blockbuster. And it's one of the first DC Comics to specifically use that phrase in its marketing. And it's all about Pariah, Harbinger, Lady Quark, and they meet a supervillain called Lord Volt, whom Lady Quark thinks might be the post-crisis incarnation of her lost husband from Earth 6. Karak.
Yeah. And under this cover by George Perez, again, given a different background, given some new coloring. It's pretty, I think it's great. I think it's a great use of that image for this collection. So So that was a new bit of information that as I was compiling my notes, and they released the solicitations just about a week ago, I was like, oh, great, we can talk about that too. So there you go.
And I was wrong again. It's the cover to DC Comics Presents number 94. Numbers. Bah.
Those were never your favorite. Numbers, I remember from the old Stump the Rios days.
Yep, I can perform operations on them, but I don't ask me to remember them. Pants always laughed at me.
Yeah.
Math major.
So there you go. If my notes are correct, that should be, the 3 volumes should collect all the bannered Crisis issues plus some extras, but it's not necessarily still complete. So I guess we should talk about what may be the closest thing to being complete is, again, upcoming. This was, it's in stores November 6, 2019, maybe. It's already been solicited. The Crisis on Infinite Earths Mega Box. It's going to have a whole slew of hardcovers. Not only is it going to have Crisis on Infinite Earths, a collection of that, and most of these tie-ins that we've talked about, but under sort of like different titles. It's also going to include all the Crisis on Multiple Earths trades, volumes 1 through 6.
All right, and some of those later ones are very hard to find these days.
And that collects all the annual Justice League of America, Justice Society of America team-ups, and maybe there might be some other stuff in there too. I'm not sure.
All those Crisis on Earth blank stories that inspired the title Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right. So you got 6 volumes of that, and then you have like other hardcovers titled All-Star Squadron, which collects all the All-Star Squadron issues. Green Lantern, which collects all the Green Lantern tie-ins, plus Legion of Superheroes, plus a Mega Man. So kind of like future sci-fi kind of books. Your Justice League hardcover, which collects Fury of Firestorm, Detective Comics, Wonder Woman, and New Teen Titans, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just, they just basically are repackaging a lot of what we just talked about into one giant $500 mega box that I was, even at DCBS discount, I was like, I ain't getting that.
No. It's a beautiful chunk of colored pulp, but yeah, I mean, you and I both already have all of this.
Right. In some format or another. One of the hardcovers is called Behind the Crisis. It collects history of the DC Universe 1 and 2, pre-crisis appearances of the Monitor. That would be interesting to see if they actually got them all, because we're going to talk about one later on in this episode.
Yeah, that even we missed.
And behind-the-scenes material and more. So,
yeah, true completism is very difficult to achieve.
Right.
We're talking about something that is as sprawling as the Crisis story and the other story elements that led up to and spun out of it. Yeah. Just depends on how one is defining the parameters of the story, I guess. What really ties into it and what doesn't.
Okay. Want to keep going with books that are coming up that are Crisis related?
Yep. Okay, we're going to keep on with current Crisis buzz.
So, also just solicited, along with that 3rd volume of the Companion, is DC is starting a line of dollar comics. They're taking a format that they used in the 70s that were mostly anthology books. They were priced at $1. This time around, they're using them as reprints, and one of the first 4 offerings is Crisis on Infinite Earths #1, using the part of the Alex Ross image from the first hardcover they ever put together back in like 97, 8 or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. It was definitely late 90s. I was in college, so it couldn't have been earlier than 97.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and they're also recycling that artwork for the Mega Box we just mentioned.
Oh, right. Yes. So that's, if you've never read The Crisis and you want to read it for $1, if you still like paper, there you go. I don't know what I feel about these dollar comic stuff. Marvel does the whole True Believers things, and I don't buy them.
Every once in a while I do. It depends.
Okay.
If it's an older issue that I have no chance of finding in a cheaper format, or if I don't feel like buying a whole collection. Like, for example, around the time of Ant-Man and the Wasp, they reprinted the first appearance of the Living Eraser. Chris and I always joke about that really silly old Silver Age villain. So I paid $1 for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it has its uses, this dollar reprint format. And I'm glad that DC is following Marvel's example here and trying it.
Do you remember the old Millennium editions that also did Crisis #1?
You betcha I do. I mean, I didn't buy that one because I already had an actual copy of Crisis #1, but yeah, I bought a lot of them.
Yeah, so did I. I bought the Crisis one, so I guess I shouldn't talk. And I'll probably buy this dollar one just because you can't be complete without it, right?
Suppose there's going to be a Bob Greenberger text piece in it?
I don't know. It'd be
There
kind of
probably
cool.
was in the Millennium reprint because all of the Millennium reprints had Bob Greenberger text pieces in them.
Interesting.
And he would have been speaking from firsthand experience in that case because he actually helped to make that comic.
Yeah. Well, as listeners are going to find out, if it has anything to do with Crisis, I usually buy it. So, yeah. Anything about that, or should we move on?
Yeah, I think we've said what needed to be said.
Okay. The rest of, let's see. So we have a couple other things. Now, these next few items, some of them have already been released. Some of them will be released. These aren't collections. These are homages to the Crisis. For instance, coming up, it should have been released by now, but I think it'll come out in the next couple months. From Dynamite, Betty Page Unbound #2, featuring a cover by Scott Chandler, which is a cover homage to Crisis #1. And it is legit. It's the first, I don't know if it's a wraparound or not, but at least the main image, I don't know where all these Betty Page images are coming from, but you can see clearly there's a Dawn Star kind of looking character. There's a Betty Page in the corner in green and white and black, just like Pariah. The Earth's exploding in the background. The way they are floating in space is very similar to Crisis #1. So when I saw that, I was like, well, I don't care about that title at all, but I'm going to get it. I'm probably ordered about 2 copies of it, 2 or 3 copies, just because I'm dumb.
That's dedication.
Yeah. So, if you know the name Scott Chandler, he did a graphic memoir called Two Generals. Also did a book called Northwest Passage, The Three Thieves, and he lives in Canada. So that's cool. I love that image. I think it's great. And I was like, I have to have it. So I ordered it. And then we can go to, let's go to Deceased, which is a little spin-off miniseries that DC is doing at the moment.
It's got nothing to do with Marvel Zombies at all.
Nope.
And
you
say otherwise, you're a dummy.
Yeah. It's Tom Taylor, right? Is that the writer, I think?
Sounds right.
Yeah. So for issue #2, a store managed to have a variant created for their store or website, Comic Hero University. And for Deceased #2, it's an homage of Crisis #7, done by Arthur Sudam, who was the artist and the madman behind all the Marvel Zombies stuff, right? And that's why we get a zombified or deceased version of Crisis #7. I don't think that's the first. I wonder if maybe, I remember he did a few DC ones back during that time just on his own, but I don't know if this is something new or if it's just using it.
That's probably the first DC zombie piece of artwork he's done that's actually been officially published.
That's good. That's good. I'll buy that. So not only is Superman all deceased, but so are a lot of the characters in the background with their faces. I haven't read the first issue, so I don't know exactly what's going on with that series. But
it's funny because yes, some of them, as you say, in the background are pretty clearly zombies, and others pretty clearly aren't. Look underneath Kara's head, and you can see very alive Robin standing there grinning.
Which is kind of funny because if that's supposed to be Jason Todd. Oh no, he wasn't dead yet, but he was dead, and then he would. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a pun that he's smiling when he should be dead.
Jason Todd is just a jerk, whether he was alive or not.
So that one will cost you something. I've seen it as low as $15, as high as $30-some. And it was released. Yeah, like I said, it's released online or through that store. So it's kind of like one of those Chase variant things, store variants that you got to look for.
ComicHeroU.com.
All right. Here's a couple of Crisis homages that have already been released. Let's go to September 2018, and we have Crisis on Infinite Cerebi by the one and only Dave Sim, where he's doing a whole bunch of these Cerebus one-shots, and he's recreating covers like the first Wonder Woman and X-Men and, I don't know, a whole bunch of other ones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's just clip arting the hell out of everything. And he also did one that was an homage of Crisis number 7. You can see the red sun in the background, people standing in the background, and it's Cerebus. What is he saying there?
Who deflated the giant Cerebus balloon? We can't have our parade without it.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Did you see this? Did you order this? Did you?
No.
Good.
No,
Well, that's your copy then. I bought 3 copies. You could have that one.
Thank you, Peter. Oh, it's a one-part maxi series. Yes. All right. Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not quite as on the nose as some of the Crisis number 7 riffs we've seen done. You know, Cerebus isn't holding the deflated balloon in his arms and crying to the heavens for one thing. He's just standing there and complaining.
But it does have the logo, and it made me think, even though it says Crisis on Infinite the Crisis is clearly the Crisis of, and it's got the Aardvark heads instead of the Earths.
Right.
So, I don't know. I guess you can't trademark. Oh, you can trademark logos, though, right? So, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
Logo. Well, I don't think you can trademark typefaces necessarily. I think if you, by modifying the contents,
Okay.
You probably changed it enough.
Okay. All right. So, there you go. You can keep that if you don't want a Dave Sim produced book in your collection, you can throw it away.
Oh, sure. if I'm going to have one, I've got several anyway,
Okay.
so I haven't really been ordering his stuff with much gusto or any kind of frequency lately. But if I'm going to have one from recent times, this should be it.
Good. From November 2018, Rick and Morty 44. This might be a late addition to your notes. Is a cover homage again of Crisis on Infinite Earths number 7. Now, this one was released exclusively at the Louisville SuperCon in November of 2018 by artist Greg Kilpatrick.
Yeah, and it makes an awful lot of sense because Rick and Morty does a whole lot of stuff with parallel universes.
Oh, I don't know the show, so.
Yeah, let's say it's about an alcoholic mad genius scientist and his dysfunctional family, especially his poor, hapless little learning-impaired grandson, Morty, whom Rick keeps... he gets drunk, and then he drags Morty along on these crazy freewheeling adventures through time and space. He's got a portal gun that he uses that they use to travel from reality to reality. Eventually, it's revealed that Rick mainly drags Morty along because Morty's flatline brainwaves help to conceal Rick's own distinctive brainwave pattern, hiding him from all the people who are trying to track him down and bring him to justice, mainly other dimensional versions of himself. Like, there's a whole society of parallel Ricks and Mortys. I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like the Supremacy from Alan Moore's Supreme run.
Okay.
Except much more twisted and dark and alcoholic. Yeah, and the other members of the family are characters too, but then you can see a lot of them standing in the background there on that front cover.
So I don't know how I'm going to get a hold of that, but I'm going to have to. And then this is another late edition, November of 2016. I don't even think this is on your notes. Doom Patrol number 3 during the whole Young Animal imprint by Gerard Way, Nick Darrington. Again, I don't know what the contents of the issue mean, but there's a one-page Crisis number 7 homage. Crisis, and that's to be expected.
Yep. It's actually pretty clever, the playing with the typefaces here, where the number 50 of the 50th anniversary logo is supposed to be in the upper left-hand corner. It's the word "so," and then in the blue banner where the maxi series description is supposed to be. So, imagine at this point
I imagine at this point.
You're having some sort of existential crisis. And on Infinite Earths is supposed to be in the foreground. It says, and that's to be expected. And
it just keeps going and going. So, clearly another Crisis homage.
Yeah, it's just another clever Gerard Way DC history bricolage.
I was going to collect some of the Young Animal stuff, and then I sort of passed on it, although I did get the Milk Wars trade paperback, which has a lot of fun.
Right, that's the
stuff.
Justice League crossing over with the
Yeah.
Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
So DC Universe and Young Animal sub-universe clashing. Yeah,
But-
I have this comic. I'm sure
Okay.
I do. Yeah, it's because I collected this version of. I think that it's been relaunched recently. But yeah, I followed this for the first like 10 or so issues.
Okay. Well, I got this one specifically for that Crisis. Once I found out there was an homage, I had to get it, and then realized, oh, look, in the back, they're also doing Who's Who pages. I was like,
Yes,
God, I got to
they
buy all of
are.
them now.
Yes, somewhere I've got a little ash can they were giving away at conventions before the first issue came out. There was nothing but little Who's Who pages.
Oh, nice. So, yes, I do get a little bit of a completist streak in me when it comes to the Crisis.
I think Gerard Way would probably be pleased to be described as a crisis kid.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing we're going to talk about in this segment is even an older book, Best of DC Blue Ribbon Digest 64. This is from 1985, June of 1985, cover date September 85. And it's a whole bunch of Legion collections, Legion stories collected in the digest format, which were popular back then. And one of the stories is called The Super Moby Dick of Space. So on the cover by Paris Cullins and inker Robert Allen Smith is a new, cover for that story. And I sent it to Adam. This was kind of the thing that kicked off this entire episode, I think.
Yep, and got us back into the studio eventually.
Yeah, because if you look at this image, the space whale, the floating bodies, the universe in the background, feels like it could be a Crisis #1 homage in a weird way.
Yeah, and if we're right about that, if Collins was doing this deliberately, it's probably the first Crisis #1 cover homage.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So,
And when Peter sent me this image, I saw what he was talking about immediately. Just like you said, the body's tumbling in space, just like the figures on Crisis #1. The way the whale's tail tapers off, foreshortened to the left of the cover, like that chain of Earths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the elements are in place.
Superboy is almost in the same position as Pariah, Saturn Girl, Brainiac 5 floating around in space. Who else is in the background? Some other characters that I can't make out.
Legionnaires or Legion support staff.
Yeah, that's so.
And off to the far left, I guess he's occupying the Harbinger spot, is Lightning Lad with his mechanical arm.
Yeah. So that's why I put it last, because I'm not 100% sure, but damn, is it close.
Should track Paris Cullins down and ask.
Well, he does a lot of the Philly airport shows, actually,
Does
every
he
now
now?
and then. Yeah.
Yeah, the only place I've ever seen him personally is New York.
Okay.
And I haven't been up there to a New York con in a couple of years. He might not do those anymore.
I don't have this particular issue, but maybe I'll hunt it down and then slap it down on his table and go, that's a Crisis image. And he'll say, no, it's not.
I don't know what you're talking
I don't know
about.
what you're talking about. So there you go. There's all your upcoming or recently released direct Crisis material kind of stuff. Collections, homages.
Not all of it. There's a few other...
Well, this is in-story stuff. But I meant sort of like, stuff you can buy, if you haven't read the Crisis or you want to fill out your collection, that could be fun. Okay. This would be a great place to put like some kind of commercial and something. Buy some Wawa lemonade. So our next segment, we're going to jump to Crisis around the DC universe, the current more or less DC Universe.
Okay, so some more recent Crisis homages or references.
Yeah, stuff that's a little bit more in story.
A little less superficial than what we've just been talking
Yeah.
about.
And we have a list here. I'll just read off the list and then we can go in depth. I don't think we're going to go super in depth. We're not going to go into complete story synopsis and all that kind of stuff.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, and I know there's probably others that we've missed, but since in the last year or two, we've had Flash number 50, which was the end of the Flash War, Flash Annual 2, Heroes in Crisis, obviously, but it's specifically Heroes in Crisis number 6, the Ryan Sook variant cover, Justice League 22 by Scott Snyder and company, which was pretty recent. Young Justice has some Crisis stuff. And then if we go into other media, there's been the Elseworlds CW crossover and all of the teases for this fall's Crisis on Infinite Earths happening on TV. Amazing.
They don't have the budget to do it justice, but I all the same, I'm looking forward to seeing what they are able to do.
Yeah. So those are the things we're just going to, I don't know how much we're going to talk about them, but there's the list. What do you want to talk about?
Well, let's see. Okay, well, the Flash stuff. Flash Annual. That's one thing I was able to dig out of the pile and take a look at last night. Yeah, you say there's a one-panel Crisis 8 homage?
Correct. So there's this whole thing going on in the Flash books where there's a villain that is...
His name is Godspeed. Real name August Hart, and he is a former co-worker of Barry's who ends up getting speed powers.
Right. And he's going through and making a mess of things, but at the end there's a hint of an even greater threat that's going to threaten the Flash books for the foreseeable future, and that character is from the future. This is the second time we've seen him. The other one is in Flash 50. And whenever Godspeed goes to him, there's always images, at least in this book, there's some images of various Flash occurrences. So we got Flash Barry Allen from Crisis number 8, Flash running from that bullet in Final Crisis. And is that Flash Rebirth, I think? Yes, I think that other image is that.
Whatever it is, there's two Flashes in that image.
Yeah, I think that's Flash, and then that should be Wally when he was in that darker Flash costume. So.
And this the very last image could almost be seen as an homage to the cover. Where you see the Flash, or in this case, Godspeed.
Oh, yeah.
On the cover of Crisis number 8, you see Barry between the legs of the Anti-Monitor, and here we see Godspeed bowing down to his master here, and we see him between the master's legs. Yeah. My early guess here is cobalt blue.
Well, that's what some people have guessed. He's also using these gauntlet things, which are evocative of John Fox. Right. Certainly spinning out of Heroes in Crisis, my big thought was this is Wally, that they would have sent him to the future to be held in prison. Because there's a lot of references in here about I'm going to go after the Flash family will pay for what they did to me, what they did to my family, and by the time I'm finished, there will be no more speedsters.
Yeah, see, that's what got me thinking maybe it was cobalt blue.
Yeah.
The whole Thawne family legacy.
Yeah.
But if it turns out to be a parallel Wally, that's kind of close to what happened on the Flash TV show a couple of seasons ago.
Correct.
With the reveal of Savitar.
Right. So, have we seen Cobalt Blue in a hot minute? No, I don't think we have.
Long time.
Yeah.
Which is exactly why it's a good thing for the current creative team to pull out of their hat. We could also mention that Impulse is pretty prominent here.
Correct.
So he's another sign of things slipping through the iron curtain of time, separating pre-Flashpoint continuity and post-Flashpoint, which also takes us back to the aforementioned Young Justice.
Right. So if you're reading Heroes in Crisis, there is some Heroes in Crisis stuff in here.
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah. If you're reading Young Justice, as Adam said, this is a small stepping stone for Impulse for that. If you're a Flash reader, it is a harbinger of things to come. And wherever this gentleman is, this new villain, he's in like the 25th or 26th century, I think.
25th, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is significant, too, because that's where Zoom came from.
Right. Right.
Eobard Thawne.
We get these random crisis images, not only just Crisis on Infinite Earths, but Final Crisis as well. So,
And I had to special order that through Golden Eagle because they sold out almost instantly. Of course, they only ordered like 2 shelf copies.
Oh, wow. Well, let's go back to Flash. Do you have anything else to say about that one now? Well, then let's go back to Flash 50 because this actually came out before that annual, and this is the end of the Flash War. Again, it predates Heroes in Crisis, but it certainly could have some effect to it, even though, like I said, it does predate. I love the Howard Porter artwork. It does feature Zoom. I think the original Reverse Flash Zoom, I think. I haven't read it, so. But here we go again, as they're whipping through Hyper Time, a whole slew of images, including...
Oh, yes, that famous progression of diminishing panels of Barry slowly decomposing and turning into an empty costume.
And then when we see, by the end of it, just his ring on the floor... That might even be Crisis number 12, 11 or 12. And then we see other images, too. We see some of Wally West as Kid Flash. This was that like a Elseworld story, or no?
No, that's from Continuity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's from the Mark Waid run, I'm sure of that. It looks like Wally is sitting there in a wheelchair, grieving for his lost abilities. I think the cover might have said something like, "You are about to witness the most tragic day in the life of Wally West."
Ah, okay.
Yeah, if Pants were here, he could probably tell us exactly which issue this is from.
Yeah. So it's them spinning through the hyper time, and then this is another one that by the end of the book. So there's a bunch of rogues that are from the 25th century, but they're not rogues. They're like the citizens. Excuse me. I think that's where we get Citizen Cold, or they're some kind of police force. So there's an epilogue in the 25th century. It's Iron Heights Penitentiary, and someone is about to escape. Iron Heights is the greatest prison in the multiverse. Eobard Thawne built it after he caught its only inmate. If he ever escaped, and then these whole bunch of people die, that inmate is called Inmate Crisis. And the inmate escapes, and he says, "Finally, the Flashes will pay for what they've done to me. Worlds will live, worlds will die, and the multiverse will never be the same."
Well, that's really hanging a lampshade on it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, look at that logo. Looks like a prison gate with a couple of linked Earths in front of it.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, that image I was thinking of, it's the cover of Flash number 79, and it does not involve Wally in a wheelchair. So
Okay.
I think I was thinking of two different things.
Okay. So here again, I mean, this is just their way of using the Crisis language to tease the hell out of something. He does have a bulky appearance, like an Anti-Monitor kind of character, but who knows who he is, what he is. So these two little cameos, little teases are going to affect whatever's going on in the Flash book. So I'm not a regular Flash buyer, although I am buying the recent Year One story, but I'm going to have to pay attention to it because something is going on.
All right, thanks for the heads up. I'll be paying attention as well.
Yeah.
And I, too, have not been a regular Flash buyer,
Yeah.
but I went out and grabbed that Flash annual as soon as you tipped me off to it.
Great. So, and by the way, this issue 50 is also Impulse makes an appearance, and I think this one is the first time we see him back prior to that annual. He just pops out of somewhere, and there he is.
Yep, big triumphant splash page. Wahoo! Not sure if you heard me or not, Wally, but so apparently he's been trying to get Wally's attention from the Speed Force for a while. But who cares? Force barriers down, and now the one and only Bart Allen is back. So now he gets to be kind of what Wally had been, as of the DCU Rebirth one-shot a little while ago.
Oh,
It was
right,
supposed to be
sure.
like hope for the old guard of readers that the old reality is not so far out of touch or out of reach. But Wally hasn't been able to bear that burden of embodying hope for everyone. So now someone a little younger and stronger and more energetic, little Bart, has to take that role.
So Flash 50 was by Joshua Williamson, Howard Porter. The annual was Joshua Williamson, but art by Scott Collins. So, anything for that? Shall we move on? Or you?
Nope, nothing more from me about Flash number 50.
All right. How about we go to something that is just another sort of, well, it's not an homage, but it's definitely Crisis related. You want to talk about that?
Yep, I'm just looking at the cover here, but it's issue number 6 of the Heroes in Crisis 9-issue miniseries by Tom King, and it looks like the art here was done by Drew Gerrits and Clay Mann. The cover, I mean, this is a variant.
Yep.
Peter had said, and who drew it?
That's Ryan Sook.
All right, excellent. And the whole deal with Heroes in Crisis is it's supposed to be a mental health treatment facility for superheroes. It's hidden out in the fields of Kansas. Superman, of course, scouted the location for it, and it's meant to
Nebraska. It's in Nebraska.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's significant to Wally because he grew up in Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
So, yep, I beg your pardon. But it's out there in the American Midwest anyway. And it's supposed to look just like a farm, just like an innocuous little farm with amber waves of grain and all that, and a nice little farmhouse, which is actually like the sanctuary where superheroes can go to be treated for mental health disorders, specifically PTSD. And Wally is one of many superhero characters that go there and interacts with the therapist android staff. And the cover, this variant cover to number 6, is a file photo from Wally's mental health file. It's an image. It looks like a Polaroid, titled in red marker, "Loss of Barry Allen." Sanctuary file, July 7th, and it's an image of Wally West with a bunch of other DC characters coming in behind him, not quite fast enough to keep up with him, as he runs toward a red-gloved hand reaching out for him, just a little too late to stop Barry from disintegrating and becoming one with time, space, and the Speed Force.
Yeah. And it's a direct link to Crisis number 12, when they go back to the antimatter universe of Quard, and they're ready to put the beat down on the anti-monitor. And Wally gets that little flash of imagery of Barry zipping through time.
What I like to call after flashes.
Yeah. And he chases after him. And then what happens next is he comes upon the Psycho Pirate trying to pull the Flash costume out from all these rocks.
His Psycho Pirate's mind has snapped. He's delusional, and he's trying to revive an empty costume.
Yeah. So all of these variants, and they're not chase variants. They're just sort of alternate covers. They're not any more expensive than the original cover for Heroes in Crisis. They're all done by Ryan Sook, at least this version, and they all are traumatic events in the DC universe. Aquaman losing his hand, Kilowog dying at the hands of Hal Jordan, Superman dying in the Doomsday event, Batman getting his back broken, Wonder Woman snapping Max Lord's neck, and Jason Todd getting beaten by a crowbar.
Literally to death.
Yeah. And this is just the one for Wally, since he's one of the main characters in the book, and an obvious Crisis reference. So I thought, should really bring that in. So again, I'm a completist. I think these Polaroid images are really great. But when I saw that one, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to get that. That's a great cover.
Yep, and I think I ended up getting the same cover, albeit entirely by accident.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. The universe knew. They just knew which one to send.
All the universes knew which one I should have in my collection.
And then, was that it for that?
That's all I had. It's
pretty much just the cover.
Right.
Yeah. So then, These next two, let's see. You'll probably be able to go more in depth with Justice League. So real quick, just Young Justice, this new title from Wonder Comics by Brian Michael Bendis and company. By the way, I mean, I think the whole Wonder Comics line is just great.
It was a good idea.
Yeah, just stellar. Wonder Twins, Dial H for Hero, Naomi, and the revamping of Young Justice, just so good. Plus, it has Amethyst in it, which is, come on, of course I'm going to love.
I knew that would rope you in. Yes, and Ian Levinstein just gushes about this every chance he gets.
It's a well-done book, but they are also playing around with some crisis-related language because the main story arc is called Seven Crises. I have not finished those six issues. So I don't know exactly what the content is, but apparently Bendis has laid out that there have been 7 major crises.
And we could probably name 3 or 4 of them immediately, but the others may be a little more subtle.
Yeah. Do you want to try?
I don't think I want to second-guess Bendis.
No, I mean, okay, so let's frame it this way. If you had to pick the 7, though, if you were the editor of that book. Because here's the thing about Bendis. I swear, he's done it twice now. I swear he just goes to like a DC Comics wiki, finds a list, and goes, yeah, I like that. Because he did it with, in his Superman run, which I'm reading, which is pretty good. He was rattling off names of Kandorians, and they were almost exactly alphabetical order of a list that I found on a DC wiki page. And then his new DC Millennium book that's coming out that's going to bring back the Legion of Superheroes, and it's going to bridge the gap between our century and their century, has all of these characters along the way, like OMAC, Tommy Tomorrow, Batman Beyond. And I found another list that was like possible futures of the DC universe. And it's almost the same characters. So I'm going, somewhere along the way, he found a list that said, here are the 7 most important crises. And he's like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
But
yeah, he's not known for deep organic research.
Yeah.
And especially not where DC is concerned. I think he's always been more of a Marvel guy anyway.
So what would you pick as the 7 main crises in the DC universe?
Crisis itself is fairly obvious. 0 Hour, another big one. Infinite Crisis.
Final Crisis, right?
Yeah, well, it has the word crisis in the title after all. Flashpoint. Yeah. I guess Superboy Prime punching the walls of reality doesn't constitute a crisis in and of itself. Other reality restructuring type events. The Kingdom? The introduction of Hypertime?
What about Convergence? Because they did sort of muck around with the...
Oh, yeah. I had all but forsworn that event in my mind because it was such an anticlimax. People were just trying to tell us, it's nothing but a 5th-week filler event. Nothing serious is going to come of this. And in the course of it, I think they tried to completely undo the events of the original Crisis off-panel, which...
That'll never stick.
Yeah. Maybe something related to the multiversity, too.
All right. So that's a pretty good... I think that's kind of close. Let me see if people have talked about... Yeah, Flashpoints, Convergence. Oh, some people are speculating Dark Knight's Metal because of the whole dark multiverse crisis aspect.
And I haven't read enough of that to really know what its ramifications were.
Yeah, I don't know if he might have listed them by the time you hear this. But that's what I would pick.
Yep, and this is all being related by Gemworld characters.
Right.
And Gemworld exists, after all, in an alternate dimension as opposed to an alternate universe. So it's kind of beyond the scope of most of your typical crisis events. So that they would... they'd have a better vantage point to be aware of things like this than any denizen of the DC universe proper, who would have their own personal timelines and memories revised at the same time these events happen. So it's very, very good of Bendis to bring Gemworld in that capacity. I'll admit that I haven't, and I admit this to you and Ian and the whole comics reading world, but I have not actually been keeping up with Young Justice either. Ian did allow me to read his copy of Young Justice #1, and we reviewed it on the air, and I thought it was kind of a messy, poorly structured first issue. But knowing where the story is going here and the possible crisis implications it has, there is a trade being solicited right now in the most recent previews for the first 6 issues, and I think I'm going to be buying that.
Great. Cool.
Yes, I think maybe the mechanical problems with the first issue will be less evident if it's just a part of a larger chunk of story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that'll be another title to kind of look for. And the other comic on this list then is Justice League 22.
Yep.
And I'm going to throw it to Adam because he's read it. I have it, but I have not managed to read it yet. So let us hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, it is just dripping with crisis significance here, Peter. This is the current volume of Justice League 2. This is the one that's being kind of tag teamed on by Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV, art by Francis Manapul. And this is part of the larger Legion of Doom arc that Snyder's been doing. The Legion has been kind of dipping in and out of the series, like alternate months. The Justice League is kind of in the middle of a fight with Mr. Mxyzptlk, actually, as this issue number 22 begins. And we do see a couple of pages of Mira and Will Payton Starman going up against Mxyzptlk, and then the Legion of Doom swings in to save the day, bringing with them an ace in the hole, the nature of which it is too wonderful for me to spoil for anyone. But anyway, that's all we get of that story. And then we jump to another character whom Lex Luthor has been wooing. She's kind of a primordial figure in DC's multiversal history, or many multiversal histories. And Lex Luthor has discovered her existence and freed her. Her name is Perpetua. She's going to be fairly important in the DC realm in the coming year. She's going to tie into this whole year of the villain thing that's going on. And it turns out that she's kind of like this primordial creator goddess. Although she's not a supreme deity, she's identified clearly throughout this story as kind of like cosmic middle management. Like there are higher cosmic beings holding her leash, and she's been assigned by them. She's like an emissary of the source itself to create a multiverse among several multiverses in the wider omniverse, and the other multiverses we can possibly assume are like the Marvel multiverse and other fictional polyrealms like that. So the first thing she does is create 3 helpers, and those helpers are Mar-Novu, Mobius, and Alpheus. Alpheus is he's in charge of the dark multiverse, the dark matter. So he's a very recent creation, but the other 2 are just the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor. And she creates they're sort of like in this little cosmological structure she's putting into place here, they're like the 3 fates. One of them creates worlds and their inhabitants. One just kind of watches over them, gauges their progress, protects them from harm. And the third sets the boundaries of their existence, keeping foreign presences out, keeping native presences in, and just rendering null and void anything that ventures where it doesn't belong. And but eventually, the Monitor discovers that Perpetua is up to no good, and she's got a dark purpose in mind, at variance with what her superiors wanted her to be doing. Like she's preparing this multiverse of hers for war. So they tattle on her, and they bring in this higher being that it manifests itself as a hawk, which I'm pretty sure is going to tie into things that Snyder's been doing in Dark Knight's Metal with Hawkman and that whole legacy. And as a result, she becomes the first, possibly the first. I mean, they're one of the Promethean giants, the prisoners of the Source Wall. And her superiors then just say, okay, this multiverse is null and void. We're going to cancel it out, and we're going to start again from scratch. And then the Monitor and Anti-Monitor are prepared to be reborn into this new reality. The Anti-Monitor is pissed because his role in this new multiverse is much worse than his role was under Perpetua's reign. Like in her regime, he would have he had a better, more positive role to play. And he takes this out on his brother, the Monitor. So he kind of swears, even as they fade out of existence and prepare to be reborn in what we know as the first DC multiverse, he swears revenge. And so, as it happens, they are born on Oa and on the moon of Quard, respectively, and they immediately seek each other out and start fighting. So there's actually there's little bits of recent multiversal story innovations, bits of plot that were thrown out there in Dark Knight's Metal. There's a little throwaway mention of the emotional spectrum, so Blackest Night is represented in there. There's even a couple of things, like there's a mention of the Overvoid, so Grant Morrison's thoughts from Final Crisis and Multiversity are represented here. So there's lots of little nods to lots of different twists and turns, the story of the shape and nature of DC reality have taken over the years. It's a neat little one-issue story, and it gives us a little further characterization for Monitor, Anti-Monitor, and their new brother Alpheus here. Just their personalities, the roles they play, their relations to one another, and it actually gives us motivation for why the Anti-Monitor hates the Monitor as much as he does when they first come into being.
Interesting.
So it's a pretty great post-Flashpoint prequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths. The title of the story is First Crisis. So that's a pretty strong giveaway, as if the whole thing weren't a giveaway, as to how closely tied into our subject text, Crisis on Infinite Earths, that story is. So all you Crisisophiles out there, buy Justice League number 22, read it.
It's almost like Crisis on Infinite. There's zero.
Yeah,
like
kind of.
Issue.
Or
alpha,
or -3 or something. But yeah, it's in the vein of that lengthy multiversal origin story we got in Crisis number 7.
Yeah.
Except it's taking things even further back than that.
It's amazing how, as we get deeper and farther away from the Crisis, I mean, obviously Infinite Crisis, which was the 25th anniversary, right? Or 20th anniversary of Crisis.
Right, 2005.
Yeah. Final Crisis, the Metal event, which they wanted to call Dark Crisis, has obvious parallels to the original Crisis. And you layer all this stuff like the Orrery of Worlds, and as you say, the
Orrery. It's mentioned in Justice number 22.
Given the Monitor a name, which they use in this issue. Jeff Johns used the Anti-Monitor in his Justice League run, spinning out of New 52, right?
Yep, Darkseid War.
Yeah.
That's where he got the name Mobius, and we find out that he is the Mobius who created Metron's Mobius chair from New Genesis.
And now you have, I guess it makes sense, Snyder did Metal. Excuse me.
Do you know why they didn't call that Dark Crisis, by the way?
I think Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo wanted Metal because of the name, the feeling the name gives, right? Like they wanted an event that was crazy. The promo image is Batman with the 2 axes. So they just wanted something that was...
Call it Death Clock Crisis.
I guess they really just wanted to separate it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like instead of DC, and we've said this before, DC constantly going back to the Crisis, which I love, but it doesn't all have to be called Crisis, right? Like eventually you're going to run out of things to say. It's like, how many times can you do Secret War, Civil War, Infinite War, Infinity War over at Marvel? They have World War Hulk. They always seem to have like war in the title, right? It's like conflict. So Crisis is a very DC thing. I get it. Heroes in Crisis, Identity Crisis, 0 Hour Crisis in Time. So I guess they just wanted to say, no, yes, it does play on those themes, but can we just name it Metal? Like they wanted it to have maybe its own thing to it. So, and I applaud them for sticking up for them, because Joker does say in the story, he says something about like, oh, there's going to be a dark crisis. And as I said, there's many parallels, images, that reflect back to the Crisis, language that reflects back to the Crisis. But I'm kind of glad they went with Metal. But they can't... what I find interesting is these writers love to play with it, and they find new ways to play with it. Like, not only just the Crisis story, but let's now what Scott Snyder did is let's go even beyond the story, like before it, like even pre-Christ, before pre-crisis history. Like that's weird and wacky. It's almost like a Galactus thing of here's a universe, let's destroy it, and we only have a few people from that universe that cross over into the new one, and suddenly they have new roles to play. It's like how many, or think of Metal. It's not the multiverse we know. It's not the multiversity map. It's underneath them. Like they
like
keep
on Stranger Things, just turn the map over.
Yeah, they find new directions to go with the story, which is like, how much more can they do? It blows my mind.
Just keeps growing and spreading organically.
Yeah.
It's like Morrison always posited, like the DC multiverse was a thing alive.
Yeah.
And life finds a way.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. I can't wait to read that. And, it's going to get to a point where it's just going to be I don't know how much more my brain can hold.
Yes, the multiverse may be infinite, but our minds are not.
Yeah. So that's great. So there you go. Pick up Justice League 22 if you haven't already, if you're someone that wants to dig in deeper. And then we rounded off, as we said, with some TV talk. Again, nothing in depth, no spoilers. I have no idea. I don't watch trailers. I don't know what's coming up. All I know is that there's going to be Crisis on Infinite Earths. Did you see the Elseworlds?
It was months ago, but yes,
Okay.
I did.
Yeah, same with me. I don't remember exactly what happened, but it was kind of the same thing. Monitor showed up. You don't know what his motives are. He seems bad, but he might be good, and he's testing them. It's kind of the same thing.
Appears to be responsible for the ravaging of the 1990 John Wesley ship. Flash reality.
How great is that? Like, that's taking the Crisis, taking their they could have brought in someone from, like, the Batman Adam West series. You know what I mean?
If there are any of them left alive.
Yeah, that's true. But I thought that was really interesting that they did bring that universe back. They brought his costume back. It's the same freaking actor who's been in the Flash TV series, obviously.
Yeah,
and
playing a few different people.
Yeah.
Barry's dad, Jay Garrick, etc.
And it almost is like they gave it an in-continuity reason of why that series ended is because he blew it up. I just thought that was fun. That was fun.
Yeah, and it is, as you said, it's a lot like what the Monitor did in his pre-crisis appearances. Just he seems sort of like a villain, dealing with villains, but in reality he was doing it for benign reasons.
And we got teased at the end of that crossover event of what was coming in the fall, and they clearly had the Crisis on Infinite Earths logo. I have not seen the finales for this season, but I think most of them have some, tease, tie-in or whatever, cliffhanger or whatever to the fall event. And the rumor is that will it merge all of the TV shows so they aren't, Supergirl isn't off on her own planet? Will she actually be brought to the same Arrowverse planet like Flash and Arrow and all that?
It seems extremely likely to me.
Yeah, it sort of makes sense,
Make it a little easier for the characters to interact.
Right. It's the same reason Marv Wolfman gave, like way back at the top of this episode where you read the portion of that intro about it's getting too confusing. Why do we always have to go somewhere to a new planet to go see Supergirl when she's on our same network? So why can't they just exist together? So maybe this will be their reason. We shall see.
Yeah. And tell me that you think the Monitor was perfectly cast.
I don't know that actor, but is that how you feel?
Well, yeah.
Especially visually.
Yes,
right?
LaMonica Garrett, I think, was the guy's name. LaMonica something, anyway. But yeah, he looked perfect.
Yeah, and it was good that they kind of kept the costume the same.
Yeah, I was afraid it would just be some dude or maybe even some woman just standing there wearing like a
leather.
Just like a black gown or something, just very cheap and basic. But no, they obviously put a little bit of their property's budget into building that costume, and I'm very glad they did.
Yeah. So, it's going to be an entirely different story, I imagine, but I'm curious to see. I'm not expecting an adaptation of what we've been reading. It's clearly going to have to play within the confines of what they've created for the Arrowverse and Supergirl. And again, I haven't seen the cliffhanger, so I don't know what spin they're putting on it, but it seems like it's probably going to have some kind of universal upending stuff. The Red Skies, something to do with that newspaper that's been going on in the Flash TV series about disappearing in a crisis. I think they're going to have elements. But it's going to be, I'm excited. I'm excited for it. I'm not looking for it to be a total page by page recreation of what we read, but for whatever they're going to do with it, sure. Let me sit back and see how it is. So that might be something for us in the future if we get to watch it. We could do like a special one-off episode just on that. That could be fun. So.
Sure. It's within our purview.
Yeah. All right.
Now we're going to do a little bit of a U-turn here and go back to talking about stuff that's a little more typical of what the Crisis tapes has been so far. That's comics that were published at the time of Crisis that more directly tied in to its events.
Right. This is something that we knew would happen at the end of 4 issues. It'll happen at the end of issue 8, and it'll happen at the end of the series as a whole, because it's probably too much to bounce out of the title to try to cover all the crossovers and all the tie-ins as we're going through the issue itself. That's going to be too much.
Yeah. So we will do some special crossover-focused episodes here. Yeah. So depending on how much it turns out to be, we might need to do like 2 crossover episodes between Acts 2 and 3.
Sure. Because for this one, I went through, using my collection, all the resources online, and also the DC Universe app, which I do have, which was amazing because I was able to find some books that I just don't have.
I'm sure it was a great help.
Yeah. So I went through all the books that shipped from DC at the same time as Crisis 1 through 4. And we're talking titles obviously like Action Comics and Superman, Wonder Woman, Omega Man, Sergeant Rock, G.I. Combat, Arik, Ambush Bug even. I even went through the first 2 issues of Ambush Bug, the first issue of Red Tornado, Infinity Inc., Green Lantern, Jonah Hex, blah, 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 Blue Devil. Just the list goes on and on. Whatever they published that was within the DC Universe. I went through for those 4 months, and I didn't read everything. I just diligently skimmed it. So I was looking for like red sky backgrounds. I was looking for upheaval. I was looking for footnotes.
Right, and little editorial captions.
Yeah, I was looking for the word crisis. I also was looking for next issue blurbs to see if anything happened. But I only found 3. Well, technically I only found 2, but there are 3. Which, again, makes sense. As we talked about earlier on in the issue, Crisis was just starting. Not every editor, writer was behind it. They wanted to wait and see. It also makes sense that the Crisis hadn't hit the DC Universe yet. Because it was, as I said, the Crisis is months later in DC continuity time. So the 2 books that I found that have a direct Crisis link, one of them is Justice League of America 239. The second one is World's Finest Comics 314. And then there is a third book we're going to look at because it was footnoted in Crisis number 4. And that's Omega Man 26. So those are the only 3 we're going to look at here. Again, if I missed something, maybe somebody will let me know. And there are some things I didn't get to. I didn't look through Superman Special number 3 because I just couldn't. I didn't find it. And I don't have it. And we're not going through who's who because although I'm not necessarily sure they had Crisis mentions just yet. Maybe they did in the first 5 issues. They probably did.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if the one that covers the D characters, because there was an entry for Dr. Light 2.
Oh. Then, yeah.
I don't know if that's one of the first 5 issues, but there's a way to find out.
Yeah. Oh, right. We have our... God, I forgot. I keep forgetting that. Our perfect bound definitive directory of the DC Universe that is so tight in the bookshelf that Adam can't get it off.
There it is. All right, so let's see. The D is for Doctor issue. Here we go, which is Daily Planet through Dr. Polaris. Oh, that's issue 6. It's cover dated August of 85.
And it has Dr. Light too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only like a 2.5 square inch block of text in there. She's a very new character. There's not much they were able to say about her. But yeah, that didn't reach shelves until cover date August, so
Yeah.
a little after our target range here.
So, yeah, so those 3 books, which is really the point of why we're doing this episode, it'll definitely mean something more when we get to the tie-ins from issues 5 through 8. So I wasn't looking through who's who. But, I was looking through a lot of books. It was kind of fun going through the DC Universe at that time. How about we hit Justice League of America 239 first? Because that one feels like the most in story. That one also feels like a writer who is obviously paying attention to what's going on with their big event. And it feels like the one that's in real time, right? So... Justice League of America 239, cover date June of 85. This is, right in the first year of the whole Justice League Detroit run. And this is by Jerry Conway, writer, Chuck Patton on art, Mike McClann finishes, John Costanza letterer, Gene D'Angelo colorist, and Alan Gold editor, with a very special thanks to Rick Hoberg for a few pages in the back. Very quickly, it is coming off the heels of, I think, a 2-part JLA JSA story, right?
Yeah, guest written by Kurt Busiek. I want to say 231 and 232 were the issue numbers there. And it was called Family Crisis, and it involved Earth 1 and Earth 2 characters.
Right.
So it was kind of like the JLA JSA event of that year.
And then spinning out of that, the characters of Superman, Wonder Woman, and Flash got roped into. He was kind of like a fiddler character, but he had like an electric,
like a guitar. Yeah, the Mad Maestro. That was the guy.
And that's like what directly precedes these issues, I think. And then so you had old members of the Justice League reuniting with new members of the Justice League, and the new members are like. The old members are like, hey, who are all these new members? And why did you disband the Justice League? And Aquaman has to give a reason. And he gives a very valid reason and says, look, when we were members of the Justice League in the original 7, the big 7, our heart was in it. Justice League was our priority.
Mm-hmm. And tight intertitle continuity was not a priority.
Right. We were young. We had energy. We had fire. And things happened. The league just grew too big. They got new members. Old members left, and it wasn't a priority. So when the Earth got attacked by Mars, the Justice League wasn't around. It wasn't at full strength. So Aquaman said, "Great, then I'm just going to disband the team."
Yep, and refill the ranks with heroes who are willing to make the league their first priority.
Right. So they accept that. And they say, well, welcome to all the new people. But then Sue Dibney has a question and says, look, you say you were on Earth 2 doing all these adventures for a couple of hours. We think you've been gone for 3 weeks. And yet in that time, Flash has been on trial. You were here, but not here. What gives? And this is where we lead into our crisis connection.
Yes, and it's John Jones who takes over from there and presents a hypothesis to answer Sue's very insightful question.
Mm-hmm.
So she's, Ralph's not the only probing detective in the family, obviously. Always been such a great pair. So he says, may I suggest you, meaning the Leaguers who went to Earth 2, were caught in a probability paradox while traveling between Earths, a ripple in the river of time. On Mars 2, recent studies of the probability matrix indicate a growing disturbance in the space-time continuum. Our scientists are at a loss to explain it, and until now it seemed only a mathematical curiosity. Such a disturbance might explain the time jump the three of you experienced. And then there's that lovely little asterisk, which refers us to, for more details about this disturbance, see the Crisis on Infinite Earths maxi series.
Right. So if all my research is solid, within the first 4 issues of Crisis, this is one of the only mentions of the current goings-on. Which seems kind of weird considering, both the Legion of Superheroes and Green Lantern had some very strong references to the Crisis, but it happens in the next chunk of books. It doesn't happen right now.
Yep, I think this is Jerry Conway jumping on board a little early just to use the Crisis as an excuse to explain little continuity glitch.
Yeah. And then I love the follow-up where Flat Barry Allen says, sounds to me like I better take a run on my cosmic treadmill, John Jones, and go back in time 3 weeks. Superman, Wonder Woman, can I give you a lift? Anything to avoid a time paradox, Wonder Woman says.
Yes. It's going to be all but impossible to avoid them soon, Diana.
Yeah.
Did you say Flat Barry Allen?
Did I say flat? Flash? I meant Flash. Flat.
Freudian slip, I think, because he falls into the old 60s, like Gardner Fox. I think it was Mark Waid once said, and actually I heard this from a listener that I met at HeroesCon a couple of years ago. We were attending I think it was a Captain Marvel-related panel, and he said something about how Mark Waid once said that in those old Silver Age Justice League stories, if the League were on a train and went into a dark tunnel, and you couldn't see them, you wouldn't know which character was saying which word balloon belonged to which character because they were all speaking with the same personality or lack thereof. And so here's Barry saying, oh, gee, I'd better get on my cosmic treadmill, John Johns, because they used to refer to each other by like their full names all the time.
So they never do follow up on that. That's just a one-off bit of dialogue there. But in terms of Crisis-related stuff, that's really it. I mean, that's about as good of an explanation as I guess you can say for anything.
Yep, and I remember I got my copy of this issue fairly early on in my life as a DC collector, so we're talking like mid-'90s. I think my folks picked it up at a yard sale in Virginia or something, like a little antique or consignment shop, and I just kind of jumped into it, and I saw a mention of Earth 2, and that kind of pricked my ears up because I had just recently discovered the concept of Crisis on Infinite Earths and of parallel Earths in reference to DC period. So I've always been kind of curious as to what story preceded this. And I guess now, thanks to the research we've done for this episode, I've finally found out. They were fighting the Mad Maestro.
And then the rest of the story just features Vixen confronting an uncle, I believe he is.
Yep, General Mustafa Maksai, the Gourd Ox, who believes he's the rightful owner of Vixen's Tantu totem, which gives her animal powers, but because he wants it for evil purposes. I mean, one of the rules of the Tantu totem is you need to be a direct descendant of Tantu, and you have to desire to defend innocence. He's already slaughtered multiple innocents, so as soon as he puts the thing on, instead of gaining animal powers, he's turned into a mindless beast, resembling a humanoid ox. And then he proceeds to battle Vixen and die in the process. But yeah, like the whole back half of the issue, once we get the resolution, the reconciliation with the old guard of the League and the nods to Crisis and space-time disturbances out of the way. As you say, Peter, it's pretty much just a Vixen solo story for the rest of it.
Right. So that's that issue. And now we're going to move to World's Finest Comics. Oh, wait, let me check my notes on here. Justice League of America 239 possibly shipped the same week as Crisis number 3 in March of 1985. So there's that.
Yep, actually, right here.
Oh.
Look no further than the Meanwhile page. Yep, March 7th, 1985. Yep, Crisis number 3 is right there.
Good. And earlier on in the story, as Aquaman is berating Superman and saying, "Hey, this team, we can't be here." He does use the word crisis in a. I just wrote. I was like, "Oh, look, yeah, there it is." When he says, "None of us missed a crisis. We were the original League. In those early days, none of us missed a crisis. We depended on each other, and we were always there." I was like, "Yeah, you didn't miss a crisis because it was an annual thing." I just thought it was an interesting. I mean, clearly, it's not truly evocative of the infinite Earths, but I like that they use that word. So then, okay, now let's move to World's Finest Comics 314, cover date April 85. Shipped at the end of January after Crisis number 1. Now, what's so interesting about this issue is because it feels like this is the forgotten Monitor appearance from anybody's list.
Huh.
All those annotations that we like to refer to online, the compendiums, even on Wikipedia, a lot of the DC official stuff, never reference World's Comics 314. Part of me wondered, is it because it shipped after Crisis number 1? But that's not true. There are other books that also shipped around the time as Crisis 1 that have like a pre-Monitor appearance. Think of that Titans issue that was purposely done well into as Crisis was going along.
Right, which I don't think we've talked about on this podcast yet.
I think you did. I think we did during the monitoring the Monitor episodes. I think we jumped ahead. Remember, because we used to talk about all of the issues regardless of when it came out. I think we did, and it is referenced in a lot of like the resource material online as being a pre-Crisis number 1 appearance, even though it came out.
It was published after, yeah.
Correct.
But this is kind of the reverse of that.
Yeah, I mean.
Or no, I'm sorry.
No, it's the
same thing. You're right.
So it's not in, let's see, the Absolute Compendium from the Absolute edition of Crisis lists other issues that came out after Crisis number 1, had Monitor appearances. This is definitely an omission in the compendiums part. It is not included in either of the recent companion hardcovers, which that's not complete anyway.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like this is where when people like to use resources online, but they don't double check or follow through, they just go, well, because Jesse Nevins says, here's the whole list of Crisis appearances, I'm going to say the same thing. But I read this and I was like, why? It's almost like that Vigilante appearance where everybody says, Vigilante 14, that's a Crisis Monitor appearance. No, it's not. If you read the issue, it is not.
We've both read that thing 6 times, and there's not even the slightest allusion in any kind of literal way to the Monitor.
And yet it keeps showing up on lists because of a letter column or someone's assumption of who some background character off panel is, right? So it's like, I love that we're talking about this issue because I can't find it online. Like you'll see it on Comic Book DB and it will say pre-Crisis Monitor appearance. It'll have Monitors and Lila's link to their character and all that. But when it comes to like some of these annotations, there are a lot of people who are not talking about this issue. So you are hearing it first from us.
Right. Just goes to show you there's no substitute for first-hand original research.
That's right. Damn it. It's the same thing when people say in that. Remember we talked about in was it issue number 3, where they're back in time in Markovia, World War II time, and everybody's saying, "Well, that's the Earth 2, Sergeant Rock." It's like, no, there's no reference to that anywhere, but your assumption. And they even make reference in one of these Amazing Heroes interviews that we're going to talk about. They mentioned that same thing about Markovia back in World War II. They don't say Earth 1. They don't say Earth 2. But
people just seem to assume that anything that happens in a DC comic during the 40s must be on Earth 2.
Right.
And it ain't necessarily so, not even pre-Crisis.
So here we are, World's Finest Comics, 314, it is absolutely a Monitor appearance in the grand scheme of all those Monitor appearances leading up to issue number 1.
Yep.
The story itself by Joe Cavalieri and
Stan
Walk, yeah, is dreadful. Did you read it? Did you manage to read all of it?
I read the whole
It's
thing.
bad, right?
Yeah, that the World's Finest had kind of fallen on hard times.
Wow. I was reading this issue going, this is a choppy mess. Like, so it's a whole thing about there's a guy working for a company who finds out that the steel company is making faulty steel.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's an inferior alloy. It turns brittle and falls apart after a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And why any corporation with any sense of self-preservation would allow something like that to be used, because it would be traced back to them eventually. And they'd save a few dollars on it in the short term, but their reputation would be utterly destroyed in the long term. So the whole premise doesn't make sense.
No.
But he finds this secret out and tries to leak it to the press.
Right. Leaks it to someone from the Daily Planet.
Mm-hmm. Yep, somebody Clark Kent knows personally.
Yeah. And eventually the reporter gets killed. There is an assassin going after the leaker.
Mm-hmm. The executrix.
Oh, so bad.
Yes, it's a female assassin. You see.
Yeah. Superman and Batman get roped into it tangentially. Bridges are falling. People are trying to save this leaker, this informant. Batman seems so inept, right? Like he does something once where he throws a batarang or something, and then she whips out an electric rod, and she's going to dip it into some water.
Yep,
that
he's standing in a fountain, and
yeah. So then he jumps out, but then he goes, "Oh, that didn't work. I'm going to have to reevaluate how to stop her or something like that." I'm like, just jump out the water and kick her in the head. What would he do? It's so bad. It's such a bad issue. There's one page where Bruce Wayne is going to turn into Batman, so he goes into his limo with Alfred, and the picture is drawn as Bruce Wayne turning into Superman. Did you see that panel?
I did, but I kind of thought that was Clark Kent going to Alfred's limo to change. I think Bruce Wayne was / Batman was somewhere else at that point. But yeah, since I'm pretty sure Alfred knew Superman's double identity, since so many people seem to know both Superman and Batman's identities at that point. Okay, we're going to check the page scans.
No, because look, Superman's already Superman. He's already Superman doing Superman things. And then Bruce is here and he's getting rid of that random girlfriend. And then he's changing.
For a little bit there, I was expecting random girlfriend to turn out to be executrix.
So was I. Because she had the same hair color, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at least Joey Cavalieri he didn't do all the obvious things in this story.
Regardless, it's not a great issue. That woman's character is Lelaine Stern. She only appeared in World's Finest Comics between 312, 315, and issues 318. She owned a nightclub called Rockslide Nightclub. So there's a random Bruce Wayne girlfriend that I never knew about until I read this issue.
Yeah. How long before she shows up in a Batman movie?
So the only reason we're here is because of the Monitor appearance at the end of the issue. And what did you think of that appearance? It's kind of keeping in standing with a lot of the other Monitor appearances.
Yes, in particular with the appearance in World's Finest number 311, because they're actually talking to one another about Superman and Batman and the last time they observed this pair. And they're watching them just as Superman has done the Superman thing and rescued Executrix after she falls from the crumbling, made from faulty iron Gotham Bridge after failing to kill the informant. Batman is perfectly content to just stand there and watch her fall to her death and call it justice. That's very 1939 of him. But then Superman swoops out of nowhere and fishes her out of the drink. Apparently the impact with the water didn't break her neck or anything. And he's just, he says something. Oh, here we go. You might call it justice, Batman, but death doesn't satisfy my definition of the term. So, yeah, we get Monitor and Lila talking to one another after that. Life's precious no matter who it belongs to. And then the Monitor says, and this is the Dr. Seuss's The Onceler version of the Monitor, where he's just sitting in a big chair and all you see is his hand gesturing. That skin-tight blue outfit with this equally skin-tight darker blue glove, as opposed to the more armored gauntlet that he had under Perez. But he's standing there talking to Lila and saying, I think we've discovered the weak link in this team, Lila. It's the Man of Steel and his real vulnerability, his compassion, his infinite capacity for mercy. The last time we watched them work together, and this is Lila talking now, she says that you spoke of Batman and his similar weakness. So they've both had a chance to look bad to the Monitor.
Right.
And then the Monitor, he picks up a clipboard and writes on it with a pen. Real high tech here. And cops to that assessment of Batman. So I did. You see what I've been saying, Lila? It's little things like this one notices, subtle personality quirks within them that we can observe and use against them. So this is Cavalieri still working from the villainous information broker definition of the Monitor. And we get a long shot of the satellite. There it is.
That's the satellite.
There are people who will pay well for such observations, and we are in the best position to make them, for our vantage point is far superior to anyone else's. And then there's one last panel in which Lila offers to show the Monitor something else, and he says, there's one other thing I wanted to see, and that's just a segue to the final page, which is kind of a preview for an upcoming story.
Right.
Yeah, so that's Cavalieri working from obsolete information here, even after Crisis number 1 is seen print. But one saving grace here, though. We do get from this and also his observations about Superman's character flaws and Batman's character flaws in issue 311. We can at least say that from this might feed into how the Monitor made the decision not to send the Earth 1 Batman or Superman as part of his originally gathered team of characters from Crisis number 1.
Nice.
As Marv Wolfman does go out of his way in one of those interviews to say that we don't involve Superman, Batman, or Wonder Woman right away in Crisis. Right. They don't feed in until later.
Right, because it's not always about power; it's about some other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's about showing as many different DC characters as possible before this thing is over.
Right. Yeah. So, that's an issue that should have been in the Monitoring the Monitor episodes that were done. But, if you don't have access to all the books, it's hard to look through. So I was glad that we were able to dig it out and put it as part of our, podcast collection.
I do think one listener might have contacted us by email or something a while ago to tell us that, you missed one. It was in World Finest Comics. And
there you go.
So that person, you may be assured now. We've so you were right, and Peter's research has uncovered how right you were, and we've redressed our oversight here.
So everybody, if you're if anybody's out there like a Wikipedia nut, go to Crisis, and if it doesn't have World Finest Comics 314, put it in there, because it should be there as a pre-Crisis Monitor appearance.
Yep. It's just one full page of Monitor and Lila goodness.
Yep. So then the third book we're going to look at real quickly again. I have a feeling that when we get to issues 5 through 8 and all of the crossovers that happen between those issues, we'll probably go a little more in depth with our tie-ins. But for now, these are pretty quick and easy. Omega Men 26. So in Crisis number 4, during the creation of the new Dr. Light, as we referenced, the Monitor is observing all this from his satellite as he's looking on into Japan, and you have it cracked open there. So,
Yep, this is safely after the Monitor first says to himself, this looks like a time for the new Dr. Light. It's time for me to create her. Mm-hmm. So now he actually goes ahead and does that on page... So this is pages 8 and 9, this sequence here. So the Monitor says, my enemy comes ever closer, and with the death of Earth 1, he shall gain that much more power. Then none will be powerful enough to stop him, but still there is one chance, my new warrior. An ion-based energy ray rips across a turbulent cosmos, its destination the Vegan star system, and an unstable star already in the throes of self-destruction. And so Monitor zaps the destabilized Vega, and Vega in turn zaps back. It sends a tongue of ionized solar energy in the direction of Earth. And then on the next page, page 9, well, actually on page 8, we see Dr. Kimio Hoshi tongue-lashing her co-workers at the Japanese observatory on Earth 1. She goes to the telescope, observes the solar anomaly happening in the star Vega, and that's where we see the star Vega. Something is happening on its surface. That light, says Dr. Hoshi, and that's where we get the caption that says, "See Omega Men number 26, signed Marv."
Right. What's the caption actually after? What's that balloon
Something is happening on its surface, asterisk.
Yeah. Oh, right there. Okay, yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah. So it is in Omega Men number 26 that we find out what makes Vega, quote, an unstable star already in the throes of self-destruction.
Right. And when you get to Omega Men 26, there's two stories going on, and the one story that is referenced here is one of the characters known as Nimbus has come upon Auron or Oron, who is the son of the goddess Zal, who is in this sun, or right?
Yeah, I think she's that powerful. She's been hiding out inside the star.
Right. And sending out these tendrils, sending out these, flames, these tendrils from the sun, and some of them are capturing Nimbus, some are just exploding out, and this is all this battle that is going on between the three of them is everything that was witnessed by Dr. Hoshi from her telescope. And there was more to the story, but what else? Did you manage to read it or look through it at all?
Well, I saw a couple of sample pages online.
Yeah, okay.
I have the issue somewhere, but it's in the pile, so I couldn't get to it. It was one of the last crisis-related issues that I was able to scrape together.
Yeah.
I think from in my back issue shopping. But yeah, it's Nimbus, Shal, and Auron are all kind of connected because Nimbus was born at the moment of Auron's conception. I had to look to who's who to find out about this. Apparently, the Scions a long time ago, and the Scions are this race of reptilian scientist beings who were created by the Guardians of the Universe in one of their early experiments. And then they started roaming the cosmos, doing scientific experiments on life forms they found. And they set up shop in the Vega system semi-permanently a long, long time ago. And they took the two native races that they found in the Vega system. There would eventually be many more, just about all of them created by the Scions' various experiments. But their first subject was the woman Shal, who was part of the golden-skinned Okaran race. And then they took a Branks warrior from a different planet and tried to force mate them. And it wasn't working until they realized that every Branks warrior has kind of like a symbiotic soul partner inhabiting their body. So they had to split off this soul partner and send it shrieking into space. And that eventually, millennia later, came to call itself Nimbus. So he was present kind of when Auron was conceived, and he's got a pretty intimate connection between Shal and Auron and himself. They're all just about equally ancient and equally powerful. So the three of them getting into this big Donnybrook in the middle of the sun is going to cause major repercussions, not only for the Vegan system, but beyond. And the Monitor, I guess, witnessed all of this and saw a way to take advantage of it in order to bring about the empowerment of a new agent for himself.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, if we know what's going to happen with Dr. Light by the end of the crisis, in the way that they defeat the Anti-Monitor, they use a binary star over in Quard that's somehow he taps into. It does make you wonder what's the connection there, like why the Vega, why that star, other than it's a DC Universe concept. Right?
Yeah, and a concept that's at the center of one of their ongoing series at that time.
Right.
But yeah, I like your note here, though. How does siphoning Vega's sun for her powers connect her, if at all, to Vega?
Yeah. So we every now and then we always, I think we did in some of the early episodes, we do this thing of what would be some untold tales of the crisis, right?
I often thought that there could have been an anthology series.
Yeah. Remind me of that in a couple minutes too. I have another thing just for that same exact concept you just said.
Okay.
And I thought this could be a great untold crisis story. The creation of Dr. Light. We see it off panel. I don't. Maybe there's a secret origin story. Maybe there's some appearance where we actually see her being created. But because the rest of her appearances all happen post-crisis, we don't I've never seen her like brought onto the satellite, in the way that like Alexander Luthor was, or Harbinger. Um, bless you.
Thank you.
I just think it'd be cool to see her creation, like the actual formation of a new Dr. Light. And also, as you mentioned, maybe she has some connection to Vega. Like maybe she could be a little bit more cosmic in her storytelling because of that. And wouldn't that be interesting?
That would be excellent, actually,
Yeah.
because she's always been a criminally underused character.
Yeah.
I mean, she was an early attempt at Wolfman's secondary or tertiary agenda of bringing more diversity to the revised DC universe, well before it became trendy to do so. And now here we are in the age when it's all anybody's talking about is diversity and representation in comics and other media. And I don't think Kimio Hoshi is being used by anyone anywhere.
No.
It would have been great if she could have been brought into the Omega Men, actually.
Yeah.
It would have been ideal. But when Tom King did that Maxi series, he brought in Kyle Rayner as kind of the Earthling POV kind of character.
Right.
Bringing in Dr. Light as well would have been a good thing to do.
Yeah. She showed up, I think, on a cover of Superman, the new Superman. Is that the Chinese character?
Oh, yeah. I think a new super. I think there's a hyphen in there.
Hyphen Man. Yeah. They did a variant cover of all Asian characters, and she's on that variant cover. But that's not an in-story appearance. I don't know if she was there in-story.
Probably not. And if so, I mean, China and Japan have historically not gotten along very well. So I don't know how eager she would have been to ally herself with the new Justice League that Kong Kinan was putting together. Yeah. Oh, and there's another, talking about untold stories of Crisis. We don't, as you say, her origin is all kind of happening off panel. That Starbolt strikes the observatory, and suddenly Dr. Hoshi's gone. So even now she's being recreated, says the Monitor, from his distant satellite. But as you said, we don't see her being brought on board the satellite. We don't know where she goes after that bolt strikes her. We don't know what really happens to her. Next time we see her, like 6 pages later, she's in her costume, and she's defending one of the Monitor's vibrational towers.
Right.
So how she came to take the name and costume of Dr. Light, a villain and not even a very successful one, it's not really shown.
Yeah. And that ship, Omega Man 26, shipped between Crisis 2 and 3 in February of 1985. So, not necessarily a direct. The book itself doesn't reference the Crisis, but as Adam said earlier, the Crisis references the book, so it's worth noting.
Definitely.
And we'll keep doing that. If we see footnotes, if we see scenes that we know are reflected elsewhere, that's what we'll take stock of for Interlude the Second.
Yeah. Now I find myself wondering if Wolfman asked the creative team of Omega Men to make that happen, or if he just kind of sent a memo around asking writers, okay, what's something that's happening in your books that I can use as a convenient explanation for how I make this character with light powers?
Right. And Wolfman, I mean, the Mega Men are his creation.
That's true.
So,
from the Green Lantern days.
Yeah, so maybe he was purposeful and wanted to make sure that there was Omega Men content within the Crisis story, because it's a corner of the universe that he helped to create.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. And we do see the Vega's protectors a couple more times.
Yeah. So, what did you say before? So you said Untold Anthology, right? Well, yeah.
Yeah, this is back in the days when DC was putting out more like quarterly or fifth week type books. I thought maybe like a 48-page quarterly Tales of the Pre-Crisis DC Multiverse series would have been a neat thing to have.
So I had this in my notes for when we talked about the Dollar Comics thing to make reference of, and I skipped it on my notes. On Twitter, Kurt Busiek, I don't remember when this is. I want to say it's around December of 2018 that let's see, maybe around like December 2018. So Christos Gage threw out there and said, hey, writers, what would be your dream project if you could write? So this is what Kurt Busiek wrote. At one point, my dream project was a dollar comic format series called Earth One, that would tell stories of any character from the Earth 1 continuity as if Crisis hadn't happened. What do you think about that?
Huh. Earth 1 specifically, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can think of other Earths that would interest me more, but yeah, I'm sure anything that set in a reality where Crisis hadn't happened would pique my interest, certainly.
Right. That sort of extrapolating where some of those characters, it's almost like 1 year later after Infinite Crisis, or in the middle of Infinite Crisis, like, see where all those titles ended, maybe just give it a year or so and like extrapolate where those characters would go.
Yeah, what direction their evolution would have taken if it hadn't been suddenly wrenched into a new trajectory by this hard reboot.
Yeah.
Of course, not all of them were hard rebooted. We have to keep pointing that out, but several of them were.
Yeah. And there have been, I feel, times within the DC universe that you could almost sort of say, okay, this is 10, 15, 20 years later, but it feels like it could have existed within the same continuity, right? Like there's nothing about a story that contradicts anything that happened pre-crisis, And certainly in the way that some writers love to play with pre-crisis concepts. Think of Jeff Loeb when he reintroduced, quote unquote, a new Krypton that was very much based on Silver Age Krypton, But it's kind of like when I jump into a new book, 2 years after the New 52, when I finally read a random issue of something, or a year or two after DC Rebirth, and I finally read an issue of something, and I went, oh, it feels like it doesn't matter when it is, right? It's got the main character, and they still are who they are, who they've always been. There's no mention of anything outside of their book, so it just feels like a random Flash story or a random Green Lantern story, But so I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I would definitely read that, even if it weren't Kurt Busiek writing it.
What if it was like Kurt Busiek and Roy Thomas flip-flopping, sort of like Secret Origins?
Oh, right. So it would be like Earth 1 and Earth 2?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I would ultra buy that.
Yeah. I mean, in essence, isn't that what Convergence was? I haven't read it. So.
No.
No?
Yeah, Convergence, well, there was this whole battle of the parallel Earths thing going on, where like a brainiac entity was conducting a kind of twisted cosmic experiment where he had salvaged little beachheads of extinct realities and bottled them like cities, like the original Brainiac used to do. And he was pitting the residents of these extinct realities, some of which were pre-crisis, some of them were Elseworlds type things,
Okay.
and just like having them battle it out for. And the prize was whichever group of whichever reality won, ran the table and won, would be given, would be brought back to life in the current DC multiverse. And it was kind of a cop out because the post Flashpoint Earth 2, the planet, not the series, but in the Earth 2 series, the Earth 2 planet had been destroyed. But it was those characters that ended up winning. It was a total fix, of course. And they just ended up getting their own little Chia Earth 2 to inhabit at the end of it all. So we were all I was keeping my fingers crossed that I don't know, pre-crisis Earth 3 would become out the winner or something like that. But yeah, that's really what Convergence was. It wasn't just telling fun little throwaway stories from extinct realities. They were battling each other.
I guess because of the titles and the covers seemed evocative of that. Like they specifically had titles that were 80s, 90s. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like DC versus Marvel, but DC versus DC.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same
Sure.
thing. Whoever won got to win the universe. Yeah. I guess DC Retro. Remember that DC Retro? There were a few stories,
retroactive.
I think.
Like
retroactive,
Wonder Woman in the 60s, 70s, and then Superman and Batman and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, they did like a Justice League, I think, in the Detroit era and stuff.
Yeah, there's at least one of those one-shots that was very intimately tied to Crisis, actually.
Oh.
It's the kind of thing we should probably be talking about on an episode like this.
Oh.
But yeah, I think Pants went out of his way to collect all of those.
Well, that'll be for after we get done with the 12 issues and we go through all the Crisis echoes, like all the books after Crisis, that will go year by year, and which,
I like what you're saying there.
We'll be doing this until we're dead.
Well, certainly at the rate of like one episode per year, we will be.
Right. Anything else to say about those 3 issues?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Are you going to read off all the...
No.
Because Peter does have here a list of all the different comics he went through.
Yeah.
They were published at the same time as Crisis 1
I mentioned
through
a few
4.
of them already, so I think
Yeah,
that's enough.
and there's one that we couldn't verify, Superman Special number 3,
Right.
which was Superman versus Amazo, and it was written by Len Wein. And Len Wein, as we know, had a hand in the planning of Crisis also. So we can't completely rule out that it's not any kind of a Crisis tie-in, but we just can't be sure. And I have a copy of that, but I don't know where it is.
A lot of those specials were inventory issues, so...
Yeah, exactly. So there's a
might
good
be
chance
safe.
that was written well before Crisis was an idea.
So,
So
what...
that puts us on our last topic.
Last segment. Look at that. We weren't sure how long this was going to go, and look, we're true to form. We're almost clocking in at 2.5 hours here.
Heck, yes, we are.
And this last segment, which I have to give a big thanks to Mr. Phil from the old Indie Spinner Rack days, is a feature on Crisis in the Press, specifically in the Amazing Heroes fan magazine of the 80s. That was, just a stellar magazine and such a treasure trove of information in terms of resource and in terms of confirmation for a lot of things. I went through issues 50 through 72 and pulled out a whole bunch of Crisis-related things. There are 2 specific articles that we're going to focus on, but I'm also going to read some other things because I think there's some interesting information that is, some of it's a repeat of stuff we know. Some of it helps to cement stuff that we know. And some other new nuggets here and there. I would love to be able to go through David Anthony Kraft's comics interview, Comics Journal, Comics Buyer's Guide. There was a magazine in the 80s called Comics Scene, but I don't have access to that stuff. Can't find it online.
If only I were still at Bowling Green, the Ray and Pat Brown Popular Culture Library. There has probably got pretty complete archives of all this stuff.
Awesome. And this is all stuff I would love to just buy, but I'm not spending that much money. But the Amazing Heroes stuff is great because it does have a lot of stuff in it. For instance, Amazing Heroes 52.
52.
Dated August 1st, 1984, in one of their news flash segments in the magazine, lists monitor appearances in a few DC books that we already covered, including Vigilante 14. There's that damned non-appearance again, right? So even as far back as that, they were eluding us. Or maybe it was supposed to be, and they just pulled it out. Amazing Heroes 61, which was dated December 15th, 1984, in their coming attractions, has the title listed as DC Universe Crisis on Infinite Earths #1, shipping December 11th, hitting newsstands on sale date of January 3rd. So there's confirmation again that the book did ship in December, was at least on newsstands by January.
Mm-hmm. You've always said you were pretty sure you remembered getting your hands on your copy during the last week of December.
Yeah. And then we go to Amazing Heroes 62, and this is one of the first ones that we're going to stop at and pull out some notes for. Dated January 1st, 1985.
My 6th birthday.
Oh, that's right. It is called the Major 1985 Previews issue, and it basically just were small little articles on all books coming up. And the one we're going to focus on, obviously, is Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I'm sure we both have some notes on what did you glean from this. So what'd you glean?
Well, first of all, it's fairly brief and pithy. It's like a full page, all told. First thing that struck my attention is the fact that the nickname for the story among the DC offices was Crisis Earth. I mean, the title had been set at Crisis on Infinite Earths at this point, but instead of just calling it Crisis, which is the nickname history has given it, they were still calling it Crisis Earth. It's a little weird.
And that's something I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else. So Maybe. I mean,
They'd probably whittled it down to one word by the end of that year because they were just so tired of talking about it.
right.
Okay. Marv Wolfman, he talks about... there's actually some information repeated between this article and the one coming up in issue 66. But one such example is Wolfman talking about how he and Len Wein had to ultimately divide the labor between them. The idea had originally been they would both work on both Crisis and Who's Who together. But in the end, they had to divide it up so that Wein became like the dominant force on Who's Who, and Marv Wolfman just became the predominant plotter and writer and editor of Crisis, which he said worked out well because he claims to be, quote, stronger in terms of plotting than Len Wein is. Interesting. Wonder what Wein would have said about that. The two of them, they were friends for a very long time, but apparently they had were at odds and hadn't spoken to each other for a while by the time Wein passed away.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I doubt that any animosity they had between them stemmed back this far. But,
right.
but still, if I were Wein, I think I would have given Wolfman a dirty look for saying that. He mentions that, quote, several entire series will be introduced in Crisis Earth, spin-offs, and I'll be darned if I can, unless she's talking about like the Man of Steel rebooting of Superman.
I don't think that came that early. The only thing I thought is maybe were they talking about like the Loser special? Were they thinking ahead, and did they know that Wally? Well, I mean, he became the Flash, but he didn't get a book until after Legends. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't know the specifics of Man of Steel, but maybe they knew that he was going to get a new book. Maybe they knew Wonder Woman was going to get a new book, but it just took a long. I mean, both of that stuff didn't happen until closer to Legends. So
it's true.
Or is it just Wolfman thinking that he knew by the end of the series? Were they still in discussion of what they were going to do post-Crisis? Were they going to stop all their books? Were they not going to stop all their books?
Oh, that's also a very good point.
Yeah.
Because at one point, Wolfman did think that all the DC series are just going to stop and relaunch from number one.
Right.
Something that he ultimately lost that battle.
Right.
But yeah, that might be what he meant by the spin-offs.
Yeah.
Let's see. One thing that stuck out for me, how Wolfman said in this article, originally it was a project called simply The History of DC. And we've known that for some time. And we decided to change that as we began discovering all the problems and mistakes and things that needed to be simplified in the DC universe. It is not a strict chronology. It was originally planned that way, but as we got more and more involved with that aspect of it, we realized that it made a bad comic. And, having read the history of the DC universe, which followed Crisis, which basically was a strict chronology, illustrated beautifully by Perez, it wouldn't have been the same comic, would have been as thrilling a comic, certainly, but I don't think I would have called it a bad comic.
Right.
And I know Roy Thomas would disagree because he's done some comics that were strict chronologies.
Yeah. I think this is going on to a future Amazing Heroes issue, but by this point, they still thought the final two issues were going to be what became the history of the DC universe. So even though in one of these articles he talks about the whole 4-issue story arc, they still had it in their minds that the last two issues were going to be some kind of retelling of the DC universe, but obviously that got changed and morphed.
Let's see. Something else I'm pretty sure I got out of this same article. I'm not finding it in the text at the moment, but I have it written down here. Wolfman claims that he seized on the idea that Crisis was coinciding with the 50th anniversary of DC by accident.
Yeah, he said no one seemed to know that it was.
Yeah, so I've seen Crisis described in some of DC's marketing as like the centerpiece of their 50th anniversary celebration. It sounds like, according to Wolfman here, if it hadn't been for him and this Crisis idea of his, there wouldn't have been a 50th anniversary celebration.
I mean, his concept of it goes back at least 4 or 5 years before actual execution of it. So maybe. I mean, who knows? We can only speculate what DC would have done for their 50th anniversary if it hadn't been for him. So maybe, I don't know. That seems kind of weird, but yeah. And that's him saying it in 1984. So Maybe he's right.
Interview would have been conducted in
Yeah,
84.
it's not. We can't blame faulty memory like Roy Thomas. So a couple passages that I got out of there. He says some villains will become heroes and some heroes will become villains. And I wrote, have we seen that in Crisis? And my first thought was Dr. Light. It's not truly a villain becoming a hero, but it is a name that we associate as a villain becoming now a hero name. So that's kind of close. I thought, is he referencing someone like Killer Frost or Dr. Polaris, who are being used for the good, you could say?
Strong argument for that.
Yeah. Did we see any hero become bad during the series?
I think his original intention was for Red Tornado to follow that path.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do see him kind of exploding and being the tornado tyrant aspect of him running amok during the events of Crisis. I guess he was supposed to be like an ecological villain from that point, just the revenge of a wronged environment.
Yeah.
But that didn't exactly stick.
Right. And then he also says here, certain characters will be salvaged from each universe, leading to one Earth. Which I wrote, spoilers much? I mean, he basically gave away the end of the series, and the first issue had barely come out. But I don't know. I guess that must have been in people's minds. I mean, the internet certainly was around, but there still were trade magazines, obviously, as we're reading. And there's Scuttlebutt, and maybe there might be some conventions. So either he feels safe to say such a thing because not a lot of people are going to read it, or they just were like, no, we know what the outcome is going to be. It's just basically how we get there.
Well, yeah, I think they were being pretty upfront as to the aim of this series. Just to streamline the continuity and the diegesis, just to make a single unified timeline and just one Earth to keep track of.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's on the journey. I think beyond that. Now let's see. Yeah, he compared what he was trying to do here to Robert Heinlein's body of work. How a lot of his novels were set in the same timeline, the same world, but not all of them.
Right. That's one of two mentions of that, and I thought that was something I wanted to make focus of. So I'm glad you brought it up because I don't think I've ever read that before. That because he says it in the later article too about not only about the timeline. But you don't have to necessarily make mention of all those other characters. But yet there's also stories outside of the timeline that are still written by the same author, I guess. And it's very much like what DC was like. They had books within their continuity. They had books outside of their continuity. He mentions it in the later article too. So I thought that was kind of cool to see because I don't think I've ever read that before, that he took that. I don't know how strongly he took the concept, but he at least acknowledged that concept. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, acknowledging his little literary influence there.
Yeah.
No, he makes the joke about how this series is going to cover everything from Anthro the first boy to Commandy the last boy, and then along comes Grant Morrison years later and literally shows us exactly that in Final Crisis.
Right.
I wonder if he read this article. And one remark of Wolfman's that I thought was kind of odd. There is no way that these books can be the most incredible comics ever done. I mean, good on him for being modest, but what kind of leading question must he have been asked to extract a remark like that from him?
I almost feel like it's his way of sort of saying, look, to go back to what you said before about like he doesn't want to, he likes to give credit where credit is due. He says that Perez is the one that came up with using Crisis on Infinite Earths as a title based on the whole Justice League team-ups, right? He likes to give Robert Greenberger, Peter Sanderson, Len Wein their due. Jeanette Kahn and Dick Giordano are the ones who really pushed him about the whole deaths list. And I feel like it's his way of saying, in echo of like making sure that the other editors and writers were involved, of him saying, look, I'm not trying to be the man that is responsible for this. Like, I don't want to come out of this and brag that I'm the one that made it happen, So I almost feel like he's sort of saying, look, it may not, it's kind of what we started the episode with. Like, it may not be the best thing. We're just trying something that has never been tried before. So I have no idea how it's going to turn out. So I don't know. I think it's sort of does it feel like it could be in that kind of vein of like, I'm not trying to say we're gonna totally revolutionize, because it could have tanked, right? Like this could have
Yes,
very well
easily.
tanked.
There's a lot of risk involved, as many of his colleagues at DC were trying to warn him.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of took it in that kind of light when he said that, because I noticed that too in that article. I was like, whoa.
Well, looking at it that way, that's a really kind of a sensible thing for him to say.
Yeah.
Last note I had pertains to the last sentence of the article, the last quote from Wolfman. If Crisis didn't simplify DC, there would have been no reason to do the book. Well, it didn't really simplify DC. But does that mean, in hindsight, there was no reason to do the book?
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And yeah, that'll be some great discussion post Crisis, post issue 12 of, you know, again, this article was written in 1984, so he had no idea what the editors and the mark and the bean counters and all the suits.
He didn't even know how the story would end at that point.
So for him, you know, he's very clearly thinking one Earth, one timeline, and then we get there, and it's like, well, because of some writers and editors who were probably still being stingy and like, I still want my toys, you know, to play with. So I feel bad for the guy, because he was right. You know, they probably should have. We talked about this before. It probably should have all started with #1 issues. I mean, as love or hate the New 52, when that first month of books came out, retailers were like Uncle Scrooge swimming in money. I mean, for a number of months after it. So imagine at a time where it might, I don't know, maybe it would have been the same thing. Maybe, I don't know if they would have been as cavalier as he wanted them to be, of totally changing identities and all that kind of stuff. Sort of like what Golden Age became, or like what the Silver Age came out of the Golden Age, right? They did change identities. Would they have gone to that extreme, or would they have just kind of restarted their titles? Yeah, I don't know.
If they had, I think it would have backslid pretty quickly.
Yeah, maybe. But that'll be a discussion down the road.
It's all just conjecture anyway.
Yeah. By the way, I wrote it here, but I don't think I gave you any of the images for this. So they're doing previews of all kinds of titles. One of the previews they did a title of is Secret Origins, which was shortly coming out.
Yep, it's kind of an important post-crisis companion series.
Yep, and it says, plans currently call for 2/3 of the stories to take place on Earth 2, though, in light of the concurrent goings-on in Crisis, Roy Thomas says that he won't use that term a lot. So I thought that was kind of carrying on the whole Roy Thomas side of things.
So apparently it was out there in the air that the multiverse, the parallel Earths, were not long for this world, if you'll excuse the expression.
Right. All right, so then a couple more notes before we get to our next article. Amazing Heroes 63 was dated January 15th, 1985. In the coming attractions, it's still called DC Universe Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it says here, 15 heroes and villains race through time to save the Earths. And it ships January 15th, newsstands, on sale, newsstands February 7th. So that was issue number 2. Amazing Heroes 64, dated February 1st, 1985. In the Newsflash segment, the first spin-off of Crisis is the Losers Special, which will be written by Sergeant Rock scripter Robert Kanigher and edited by Murray Boltinoff. And it'll be 40 pages, and it'll appear sometime during the summer, so they knew that spin-off was coming out before issue 2 even hit the stands.
Okay. I'd call it more of a tie-in than a spin-off. But
yeah.
Well, by contemporary vocabulary,
sure.
Anyway.
In that issue, there's some major DC advertisement, a full cover of Crisis #1, an insert, a Who's Who ad. That's all stuff that we've sort of been seeing in other books. Amazing Heroes 65 was dated February 15th, 1985. Now, this I find interesting because only issue 2 had shipped of Crisis, but in this newsflash, Jerry Ordway will take over inking from Dick Giordano on Crisis. So they knew as early as issue 1 or 2, I guess, or the release of 1 and 2. Because that makes sense. They probably would have been working on issues 4 or 5 by that point. But retailers and fans knew that Jerry Ordway was going to come on the book. It's kind of cool.
Yep. And I doubt anyone was all that surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, inking the Perez pencils to that degree of detail would be a very time-consuming task, and Giordano, as VP of the company, didn't have that much time to consume.
Right. And then in the coming attractions of that same issue, again, they still call it DC Universe Crisis on Infinite Earths number 3, shipping February 12th, newsstand on sale March 7th. Leading us to the big Crisis issue, Amazing Heroes 66, dated March 1st, 1985. So 2 issues had been out, possibly a third or shortly coming out by the time you read this article. It has a cover by Perez featuring Harbinger and the Monitor and the satellite and all the Earths behind it. And in an article by Mark Waid, we get an overview of the Crisis, detailing some information that we already know, cementing some information that we already know. But it is a major article. And that issue, again, if you're a completist, if you're a Crisis kid and you're a completist, you need this issue. The cover's gorgeous. Perez at his height, one of his heights, his first height.
He's a man of many peaks and pinnacles.
Yes. So we got a lengthy article from a whole bunch of people's perspectives. Marv Wolfman, George Perez, I think Greenberger's in here too. What do you have in terms of this issue, of this interview?
Well, talking of Wolfman having spoiled the ultimate outcome of Crisis, this article actually has some pretty major story beat spoilers for the 4th issue. Because he comes right out and tells you, oh, yeah, the Monitor's going to die.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, again, yeah, maybe...
And at the hands of Harbinger, right? I think he even says that she was created. Yeah, that's so weird.
Gets into her background and her destiny and all of that. And, yeah, maybe you're right about how Wolfman just assumed very few people would be reading this. Maybe he thought of Amazing Heroes as like a trade journal, which I don't think it actually was. Okay, so there's some spoilers in there. I was happy to see that he gave some Wolfman gave some due to Dan Mishkin as probably the most eager contributor of ideas and input for things that could be done with the series concept. Probably more than anybody short of Roy Thomas.
Right.
And I actually got to meet Dan Mishkin not long ago.
Cool.
Yeah, he was. I went back to Bowling Green for a Batman academic conference.
Oh, you went to it? Great.
Yeah,
awesome.
yep.
Nice,
So I got to Mike W. Barr was there, and Dan Mishkin was there, and a bunch of academic presenters were there to talk about Batman. And,
Very cool.
And Mishkin talked not just about Batman, but about his role at DC in the '80s overall, and he talked about, among other things, what happened with Crisis.
Nice.
So I'm glad to see a fellow Bowling Green student get his due there from Wolfman. He talks about Harbinger and Pariah, the new characters, and basically admitting that he didn't know what he was doing. As when he put these characters were half-baked. He says, Harbinger's powers are semi-undefined. He says, and I quote, I haven't yet worked out Pariah's abilities only because he won't be that essential to the outcome. So he's just saying, yeah, he's a throwaway character. He's just in it. His role in the story is that he's in the story.
Right. Along those lines, he says, Monitor has no superpowers, which
is kind of contradicted a few times in the actual text.
He says Harbingers are machine-given, which is in the story of her always going into the machine. But I guess when all the worlds get reborn and she gets reborn, I wonder if that's changed.
Yeah, maybe when the energies of the dead Monitor flow into her, that might make the difference.
Yeah.
Because I have to think Wolfman rethought his position on the Monitor, having no real superpowers of his own.
I mean, there's in the second issue where Monitor goes to sit on the chair, and I think it's Dr. Polaris tries to zap him, or Simon or something, and Monitor just kind of goes, and there's like a force field. It could be technical. It could be, technology and not his own powers, but...
just sufficiently advanced technology that's indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. But then I guess in Crisis 7, when you get the origin of the Monitor, he very clearly has a sphere of energy that he's looking at the Anti-Monitor in.
And he has to battle the Anti-Monitor with it, too.
Yeah.
So.
And he's naked, so there's no technology there. Things change. He morphed his ideas.
Right. Yeah. He did that a lot.
Yeah.
On the art end of things, I was surprised to see Perez calling Crisis his swan song for series work. He thought he was going to take some break from, possibly permanent, obviously not permanent, as history shows us, but he seemed to think it might be, from series work for a while. And it's kind of bittersweet reading that now that he's officially retired fairly recently.
I also like that Paris says he didn't want an overview beforehand so he could be surprised as he got each script.
Yep, getting his fan jollies from reading this, because he wouldn't get the opportunity to read the finished product like new, so reading the script did that for him.
And he joked that by him not being a co-plotter, he could absolve himself from any blame when readers were like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I don't know, I'm just drawing the book."
Address brickbats to Wolfman and maybe Greenberger, but I just draw the thing.
Yeah. Do you have any other notes on this? I have a few others if you don't.
One more I think I'll save for later.
Okay.
Especially if it's one of those on your list.
Okay, let's see. Well, we get some more Robert Heinlein mentions, which is cool, which I've never seen before. I said earlier, by this point, the final two issues were still going to be the history. They even, I think, make mention that if not the final two, at least the last one might be the history, but obviously that changed. Something Wolfman says about the Monitor and his pre-crisis appearances. Because we decided to use him this way after the fact, there were some minor discrepancies. He's trying to talk about they took the character of the librarian, they showed him up, they put him into that new teen, when they decided that they were going to use him for this event, they showed him in New Teen Titans very early on. They obviously knew what his role was going to be within the Crisis. And then did they say, well, we should percolate him, we should pepper him through the DC and all these appearances? Like, I'm a little confused by his recounting of those pre-Crisis #1 Monitor appearances. What I think he's saying is they developed him for the series and then said, oh, we should put him in the DC universe. But then he's not the same personality. Or is he saying that he knew the Monitor was going to show up in all those DC books, and then he said, oh, I could use him in the Crisis? Which that doesn't seem to make sense, right?
No, it doesn't.
So the whole wording of it is a little weird in that paragraph, and we've talked a lot about the personality discrepancies of the Monitor.
Oh, yeah, constantly. That's what the whole Monitoring the Monitor series of episodes were all about.
Right. So it does make me wonder what the sequence is there, or maybe they knew they were going to do the whole peppering of the Monitor and his personality was going to stay the same, and then they decided to go, oh, he should be, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And that paragraph didn't help me figure it out either. So, and that's all my notes for that issue.
Yeah, the one more thing I had was, again, it's turning our gaze back to poor Roy Thomas and how badly this affected him and his prospects at DC. Here on page 28 of the article where Wolfman, here we go. Moreover, although the overall plan is to have all DC's multiple Earths collapsed into one, so that's public knowledge here, they will still be a part of DC history. Well, Earth 1, a quote from Wolfman, Earth 1 and Earth 2 will have existed and will have mattered. We're not denying them. All-Star Squadron will still be placed on Earth 2. There will be some past that will never have existed. Not much. It's being done with the best of intentions and as much care as possible. Well, that's not exactly the way it worked out in the end. So that's the kind of assurances that Roy Thomas was being given, that Earth 1 or the various parallel Earths would continue to exist at some point in a variant past.
Right.
But then the breaking point there would be 1985, and past that point they don't exist, and very few people will remember that they had existed.
Right.
So as long as he keeps setting his All-Star Squadron stories in the 40s, that's still a multiversal zone. But I guess in the end they decided that would just make things even more confusing than they had been.
Yeah, so it goes back to... And did they do that in Infinite Crisis? They referenced that there was a multiverse, right? When I seem to remember them showing the Silver Age rocket ship and the John Byrne Superman rocket ship.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
But who was showing or seeing those images?
I think it was Alexander Luthor.
Well, okay, he of course would know.
He would
because
know.
He and the other guys in the Pocket Universe, like
Right.
Superboy Prime, Earth 2, Superman, and Lois, they would know.
Right. And I seem to even maybe it was the Earth 2 Superman's rocket ship, because I think I mentioned at the time, isn't it interesting that even though they're talking about pre-crisis, they're using the John Byrne imagery, not pre-crisis Superman, which we've talked about many times as saying he has not shown up.
Yeah, where the hell is the pre-crisis Earth 1 Superman?
Earth 1 Superman, yeah. The Kurt Swan Superman. He's not to be found. But I think we've talked about that before, about how cool that would be if you truly broke the time barrier to 1984. It would be pre-crisis. Not the revamped history, but c'est la vie. Yeah.
Now that is, well, I think the Time Trapper had the same idea.
Yeah. And where?
Well, this is one of those weird little post-crisis time patches that they invented. But remember, he created that whole pocket universe, which is just a little beachhead of pre-crisis Superman continuity.
Right, sure.
The Time Trapper created so that Superboy could still exist and could still inspire the Legion, and could keep the Time Trapper's future reality intact.
Right. I thought you meant something else. My bad. Yeah. Yeah, it was a fluid series. Just like we said way at the beginning of this episode. Corporate
That's
comics.
what makes it so much fun to discuss.
Yeah. And then continue rounding out our Amazing Heroes here. Amazing Heroes 67, dated March 15th. Very simply, again, Comic Attractions calls it DC Universe Crisis on Infinite Earths number 4.
When are they going to get that memo?
I don't know. Amazing Heroes 69, dated April 15th. Lists the following October cover-dated books on sale during the summer will interweave with Crisis on Infinite Earths. DC Comics presents 86, Flash 350, Superman 412, Omega Man 31, Blue Devil 17, New Teen Titans 13, All-Star Squadron 50, and Comic Attractions still calls it DC Universe, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Let's see, Amazing Heroes 71, dated May 15th. DC Universe Crisis on Infinite Earths number 6 ships May 14th, on sale on newsstands June 17th. The Loser Special ships May 14th. And there was a DC Comics ad of issue number 7 where Superman was holding Supergirl. So at least by issue 5, we knew that Supergirl was going to be dead.
If we happen to be reading Amazing Heroes.
Yeah. But then they would also have house ads, and retailers got that poster. I wonder how early they got that poster. And that's it. That's really it for the Amazing Heroes. So if I get any more information somewhere else, it's always fun to go back into that textual stuff.
Oh, always.
Yeah.
And, well, we have delivered a bushel of content here for our little interlude episode.
Yeah. So, as we said, this is what we hope to do for future interludes, but let's not think about that just yet. Let us see how we can get, see how we get to the next. Obviously, the next episode would be about, be about
Part 1 of issue 5.
Right. So either that'll happen, or if for some reason you watch the Crisis TV event, then both of us will talk about that. Who knows? I don't know.
We could certainly do a mini episode about that.
Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Happy 10th anniversary, in case we don't ever do an episode this year.
We'll try.
We'll try.
Gosh, I do end up. Unfortunately, my schedule in Stone Harbor ramps down probably right about the same time yours ramps
September.
up. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we've had some success like with early November.
Yeah.
So maybe we can get another one in before the anniversary.
But these we're recording on a Tuesday. Tuesdays work great for me. I mean, so because I don't teach on a Tuesday. So
yep, they're great for me during the summer because it's one of the slower days of the week.
Well, I mean, we could always schedule for August.
All right.
If you want to try to jump right into issue 5.
Well, we're really going to be spoiling the boys and girls at home here.
Hey, there was those 2 episodes we did, remember we did 2 episodes all in one? It was the last 2 episodes. We did all in one day, and then we released it one month and then the next month.
Huh.
The tricky thing about episode 5, it has that cover with all the faces. That's going to take a long time.
We're not going to be able. We're like vampires here. You scatter objects in front of us. We have to pick them up and count them and name them all.
And then it has that double page spread in the middle too, of all the.
That one.
That's issue 5.
Yeah.
That might wind up being a 3-parter.
Hello, JLA Avengers #3 cover.
Yeah. But we'll see. We'll see where we'll go. I love doing this series. So.
So do I.
And I have nothing to do in August. So.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see.
August
That's all we can promise.
It usually does get pretty busy in Stone Harbor at that time, but we'll see what we can make happen.
All right.
But in the meantime, this has been Interlude the First, after the first act of Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Maxi series. We'd like to encourage all of you to go to thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com, where there will be a talkback thread about this episode, where you can share your own thoughts and observations and your own original research about the topics that we have covered here today. So thank you very much for listening. We're getting out of here just shy of 3 hours. Be good to one another, and we'll talk to you next time.